Hello, Akshay.
Dr. Akshay, could you please give a check to your audio system also? Oh, God. Dr. Akshay, can you test your mic, please?
Don't think he can hear.
You know, his mic icon is not there only. I've just sent him a mail. I don't have his phone number, unfortunately.
I have. I will call him.
Okay, thanks. Send a mail. He's logging out and logging in again. He's received my mail.
Right. So he's logged out and he's logging in.
Yeah.
Because he said he couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, that's what. Because, you know, his mic is not, his audio system is not connecting into whichever device he's using.
Right.
Okay, I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Sometimes restarting always helps. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's always, that's the reason why we log in a little early, to take care of all such glitches. Yeah, I think we can start today's sessions. Good morning, everybody. It's been a pleasure to have you people. I think most of you who have joined in today also have been following us from the session, inaugural session. So welcome back again. But people who are joining us for the first time, let me just put some rules in place. This conference is following a Chatham House rules, so participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speaker, nor that of any other participants may be revealed. Being in a virtual mode, we would request the attendees to keep themselves muted throughout the session, unless asked to unmute and speak. You are given the option of raising your hand buttons, which is on your right-hand side. Please do that before asking a question. The chair will unmute you, and you can therefore ask questions to the panelists as and when we come to the Q&A sessions. If you, as an attendee, plan to have your videos on, please ensure that you maintain decency, exercise consideration and respect in your speech and actions. Thank you. And I would now request my students to introduce the panel before handing it over to Professor Sato from Kobe University.
Good morning, everyone. Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the fourth session of the conference, Japan's Grand Strategy in the Indo-Pacific. It is my honor to introduce our esteemed chair, Dr. Takahiro Sato, along with Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Dr. Shabani Rai Chaudhary, and Mr. Akshay Mathur. Dr. Takahiro Sato is a professor of the Research Institute for Economics and Business Administration at Kobe University. His research areas are development economics and studies on the Indian economy. He has authored a lot of books and articles which have appeared in Journal of Policy Modeling, Economics of Governance, Oxford Development Studies, Economic and Political Weekly, Journal of Asian Economics, and European Journal of Development Research. In 2007, he received the first JSAS award from the Japanese Association for South Asian Studies. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa was a member of the Indian Foreign Service from 1979 to 2017 and has served as the Indian ambassador to Italy, Thailand, Oman, and Poland. As secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs of India, he oversaw relations with Southeast Asia, Gulf and West Asia, Pacific and Australasia. He has also served as the Indian ambassador and permanent representative to FAO, IFAD, WFP, UNSCAP, and worked with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, heading the government relations and political affairs and media and public affairs branches. He has also served as India's chief delegate to the East Asia Summit, ASEAN India, ASEM, ACD, the Arab League, Mekong Ganga Cooperation, and ARF meetings. Ambassador Wadhwa's previous postings include stints with the Indian Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Geneva, twice to the Indian Embassy in Beijing, and in the Commission of India in Hong Kong. He has also led a CII task force for writing the Australia Economic Strategy Report for the Indian government. Ambassador Wadhwa is currently a distinguished fellow with the Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and serves as an independent director on the boards of some corporate firms. I now hand over the subsequent introductory remarks to my fellow Anupam.
Thanks, Ashmita. Good morning, everyone. Our next panelist is Dr. Shabani Rai Chaudhary. She is a professor in Japanese Studies, Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has been the recipient of Japan Foundation Fellowship, Visiting Scholar Program to Kaizai Koho Center, Ministry of Economics and Industry, Japan, Policy Research Institute, Ministry of Finance, Japan, a visiting fellow at Research Institute for Economics and Business Administration, Kobe University, and Graduate School of Development Studies, Nagoya University. Her research interest lies in the area of Japanese investment in India and enjoy micro-level firm studies. Warm welcome to you, ma'am. Our next panelist is Akshay Mathur. Akshay Mathur is the director of ORF Mumbai and head of the Geoeconomic Studies program across all ORF centers. He is also a senior fellow with the Center for International Governance Innovation based in Waterloo, Canada, for whom he contributes with research on global economics, and digital governance issues. Prior to joining ORF, he was the Chief Executive Officer, Director of Research, and Senior Fellow of Geoeconomic Study at the Gateway House, Indian Council on Global Relations. He has written columns for Indian and foreign news publications such as the Financial Times, Economics Times, and Business Standard, and has been interviewed by the New York Times, Bloomberg, BBC, Channel News Asia, CCTV, etc. A warm welcome to you, sir. Now I would hand over to the chair for the further proceeding. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for nice introduction. Good morning. I am very honored to join in this conference as the chair. First of all, I really thank Professor Sravani Roy Chaudhary, her JNU colleagues, and the Japan Foundation, especially Noguchi-san, for allowing me to be here. The session 4 is titled by Economic Engagement in Indo-Pacific. I expect we will see the economic aspects of Indo-Pacific regions, covering the regional trade agreement, including CEPA, RCEP, TPP, and the global value chains. We have two distinguished speakers. The first speaker is Ambassador Wadwa. The second speaker is Professor Sravani Roy Chaudhary. Each speaker has 50 minutes for presentation. After the presentation, Dr. Mathur will give comments and questions to our main speakers. So, Ambassador Wadwani will present the search for alternative in the Indo-Pacific, the Blue Dot Network, and the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative. So please start your presentation, Ambassador.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by saying that it was in 2013 when we had President Xi Jinping unveiling his vision of the Silk Road economic belt in Kazakhstan and then the Maritime Silk Road in Indonesia. These proposals then, as we all know, resulted in the One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative, which has eventually boiled down to infrastructure development, but its geostrategic ramifications have been felt quite widely, most of all in the Indo-Pacific. Not all in the region have embraced the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is seen by many as opaque and has stoked some concerns about high levels of debt and Chinese control, leading on to acquisition of strategic infrastructure like ports, airports, and also a fig leaf sometimes for military expansion. But governments in the region and beyond have struggled to offer an appealing and competing alternative. So the way forward to meet the challenge of growing Chinese influence and threat, which is perceived by the others in the Indo-Pacific and beyond, has obviously received attention from those who are adversely affected. And United States, for example, embraced the free and open Indo-Pacific concept, which was floated by Japan, as we all know, in order to counter growing geostrategic dominance by China. From the US point of view, the national security strategy under Trump clearly mentioned that China seeks to displace the United States in the Indo-Pacific region, expand the reaches of its state-driven economic model, and reorder the region in its favor. So the US saw China's militarization of artificial and other disputed islands in the South China Sea as an attempt to restrict the free movement of trade, which undermines regional stability. Japan came up with an alternative quality infrastructure plan and initially set aside $200 billion for infrastructure in the Belt and Road related countries. And after the launch of the Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Trilateral Forum, this was in 2018, to make private sector engage with India, Japan, and the US at the governmental level for investments in connectivity and infrastructure projects in the region, we had what is called the Build Act, which is better utilization of investment leading to development. And this was passed by the US Congress in the same year to meet the challenge of the Belt and Road Initiative in the Indo-Pacific. Then the Quad countries have also looked at working together on infrastructure projects as an alternative to the Chinese BRI by pooling their resources. This would include funding, which is made available by various countries and lending institutions at different stages, which is, of course, we have to take into account what happened with the ADB's Private Sector Infrastructure Fund, which was a LEAP, which was created with JICA. Then we also have the Japanese FDI, which is ongoing in the region. Also, there was the $60 billion funding through the Build Act, and then the $1.5 billion appropriation per year up to 5 years through the Area Act, also in the United States, plus the Infrastructure Initiative by Australia, which is worth 2 billion Australian dollars, which is aimed at the Pacific. India also, by the way, provides a substantial amount of aid to the region. So $200,000 each year on a rollover basis to each of the 14 island states who are members of the FIPIC, which is the Forum for Indo-Pacific Island Cooperation for Developmental Projects. And this is in addition to the ASEAN India Fund, the ASEAN India Green Fund, and the $1 billion credit facility, which was announced for digital and infrastructure connectivity in 2015. So all these resources can be pooled for few model projects as capability demonstrators. And India can also consider joining others in specific infrastructure projects with impact. Japan and India, for example, have always expressed the hope of working together in infrastructure-related projects in the Indo-Pacific, and beginning has already been made with a few selected projects in the region. So in this background, we now come to the Blue Dot Network, which I'm going to talk about a little more. The Blue Dot Network, which has been built as actually a multi-stakeholder initiative. This is for the private sector, the civil society, and the government all together, coming together. And this was announced by the United States, Japan, and Australia in November 2019 at the Indo-Pacific Business Forum in Thailand. So the three partners said that they plan to certify infrastructure projects, and that included ports, roads, and bridges around the world with a focus on the Indo-Pacific, which meet high standards of safety, of transparency, accountability, sustainability, and developmental impact. So the stated purpose was for private investors, that's US pension funds and insurance companies, which manage long-term assets, to get the confidence to address the global need for infrastructure, which was then estimated at $94 trillion over the next 2 decades. Closer to home, of course, the ADB has said that it expects that infrastructure needs of the Indo-Pacific alone would be worth $1.7 trillion a year through 2030. So the idea is promising, but faces a lot of questions about the system to be followed for certification and funding incentives for recipient countries to shell out more funds and wait longer for the much needed and often urgent infrastructure. Questions that will need satisfactory answers if the initiative is to succeed. So the Blue Dot Network announcement followed the establishment of the US International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, which happened in 2018, which in turn was a replacement for the US Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC in short, as the lead financial institution of the United States. So the DFC and its Japanese and Australian counterparts led the initiative, with the DFC in possession of twice the financial muscle, if I can call it that, of the OPIC, and can now invest up to 60 billion US dollars. It can take equity positions in investments as opposed to just lending. and it has a mission to support U.S. foreign policy positions and objectives like its Japanese and Australian counterparts. The Japan Board for International Cooperation, JBIC, and the Development Finance Arm of Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT. Then discussions are also on with the EU and others for cooperating in the framework of this Blue Dot initiative. The G20, we recall, has endorsed a set of principles for quality infrastructure investment. This happened at the meeting in Osaka in 2019. So a wide array of countries may join the initiative. And the infrastructure projects will also need to follow the G7 Shallowa commitment that was on innovative financing for development, as well as the Equator Principles, which task financial institutions to assess and to manage environmental and social risks, which in power projects in particular. Basically, it builds on the success of Japan's G20 leadership in building consensus on the principles for quality infrastructure investment, which is the basis for the vision of the Blue Dot Network. What are the US aims? The US aims are to bring innovative companies, technical expertise, rule of law to combine with pension and insurance funds who want returns. And the governments of the three countries, unlike China, cannot fund the infrastructure needs, but they can mitigate the environmental, the health, social and safety, inflation and foreign exchange risk. And they do this by taking some equity and also lending support to these projects, which would then leverage private capital. So essentially, therefore, what it is in practice, it's a confidence building exercise. Now, India has not joined this initiative as yet, but of particular interest to India is the fact that under the Blue Dot network, infrastructure projects within the Indian Ocean region will be certified in keeping with globally recognized standards, which are based on transparency and financial viability. The initiative, of course, will need a lot of work for two main reasons. First, it will not provide direct financing and therefore may not be what developing countries need. Secondly, the Blue Dot network will require coordination amongst multiple stakeholders when it comes to grading of projects. So what is the way forward? Well, the way forward here would be to standardize implementation of large symbolic projects with transparent, clean finance, and to carry out effective project delivery. That's the key. Private capital, of course, cannot match Chinese state capital, and the emphasis on high infrastructure standards will not deter Southeast Asian countries if China continues to disburse at a faster rate. Also, if the funds are risk averse and more responsive. So Blue Dot network projects would be able to raise debt, including from abroad at affordable rates. And that's where it scores. And all in all, the partners in the Blue Dot network need to increase the pool of projects which carry adequate funding and then provide technical help to the Indo-Pacific countries to manage even the Belt and Road Initiative projects. For example, through the multilateral development banks, which could be seen as a politically neutral technical arbiters. Even as the Blue Dot network was being considered as an alternative to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, we had the pandemic. And the pandemic brought about an unprecedented halt in manufacturing operations across countries. So this resulted in a supply disruption that was beyond the preparedness that countries had in place for usual contingencies. Now, over the past decades, China, and I would say a few other countries in the region, have emerged as manufacturing hubs in the Indo-Pacific. Multiple factors such as economies of scale, lower labor costs, access to technology, government support to industry, etc., have driven this trend in China. And this has also led to development of new sea routes for trade and consequently favorable sea freight, and in turn further concentration of manufacturing there. So with the onset of the pandemic, the economic benefits of this strategy started to be compared with the supply chain risks and the consequent risk of a complete shutdown in operations that emerged from this approach. Diversification therefore emerged as an obvious risk mitigation measure. To begin with, trade tensions between US and China, which preceded the pandemic, as we know, and they got exacerbated in 2020, as we've seen, accelerated the breakup of the world's technology supply chains. And US companies have also been forced to limit their China ambitions due to geopolitical realities. A new system of regional rather than global supply chains now appears likely. And countries like India, which has a large supply of cost-effective labor, technical talent, obviously want to use this opportunity to galvanize manufacturing and also to work with other like-minded countries in the region to reduce the dependency factor. Last year, the Japanese government had set aside 2.3 billion US dollars for the shift of critical industries from China to Japan, out of which 10% was set aside for a shift to the Southeast Asian countries, India and Bangladesh. Now, in this proposed shift, except for a few companies in the electronic sector, countries like Vietnam, Taiwan, and Thailand have been the preferred destination for most of these shifts. I think when Shabani talks about the RCEP, it will be quite clear why this preference has emerged. So I will not go into that. But with this agenda of resilient supply chains on their minds, the trade ministers of India, Japan, and Australia had a video conference on 1st of September 2020, where they reaffirmed their determination to take a lead in delivering what they called a free, fair, inclusive, non-discriminatory, transparent, predictable, and stable trade and investment environment, and keeping their markets open. Now, other countries in the region have also been called upon to participate in this initiative, and the role of business and academia in this initiative has also been recognized. More importantly, they decided also to support the need for specific activities for enhancing the resilience of the supply chains, which include those related to promotion and facilitating trade and investment, as well as diversification of production base. Then the ministers also identified the need for digitization of trade procedures and also adoption of electronic documents commensurate with capacities as a very important step for facilitating trade and thereby maintaining resilience in these supply chains. Then for the purpose of expanding participation, the ministers also discussed the need for looking at countries with similar line of thinking in terms of being reliable and dependable suppliers for ensuring resiliency in supply chains of the region. I must say that Japan has already launched cooperation with the ASEAN over supply chains. It's got an ongoing strong supply chain network and is expected to explore ways to combine these two initiatives. Some of the key parameters which were described by the Indian Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal for extending the participation to other countries were market-oriented policies, demography, growth potential, the fiscal state of play, including existing debt burdens, and geopolitical strategy. If the initiative is successful, then of course the partners can look to replicate the model in the Quad context. We should also discuss this issue in its meeting, which happened in Tokyo on the 6th of October 2020. Again, individual countries like Australia and India have taken some internal steps which will help roll out this initiative. In Australia, we've seen Prime Minister Scott Morrison has unveiled a plan. This happened on the 4th of October last year to invest $107 million in a new supply chain resilience initiative and spend more than $1.7 billion on a modern manufacturing initiative which focuses on 6 priority areas for support. In India, in order to make India an attractive global hub for manufacturing, the government has reduced corporate tax rate to 25%. It's also rolled out the production-linked incentive as well as the phased manufacturing plan. And overall, the government has identified 24 focus sectors as part of its manufacturing push under the PLI and PMP schemes. But normally, initiatives such as this would require the participants to agree on preferential investment rules, key tariffs specific to those supply chains, quality standards, the rules of origin for determining value addition, cross-border data flows, rules, and also dispute settlement mechanisms. But from all accounts, and given the geostrategic situation in the region, all the 3 participants are keen to launch this initiative as early as possible, utilize the existing bilateral agreements between countries, and as they go along, put into place further measures for trade facilitation and work with as many like-minded partners as possible in the Indo-Pacific region to bring about diversification and to reduce dependency. But the fact that the initiative has still not been fleshed out, despite their stated intention to do so by the end of 2020, however, has now raised some critical questions on the success of the supply chain resilience initiative. Each partner country will naturally have specific sectors which it will back. There will be a temptation to reduce tariffs on intermediate products while increasing them for finished products, thus resulting in what we know as distortion of trade. And China, with its large market, its supply networks, and reliable infrastructure, along with, I would say, still affordable labor force, offers a big attraction, and companies are still wary of shifting to other markets, even if their home countries would like them to do so. The reconfiguration for high investment sectors is also difficult post-COVID. There will therefore have to be a better harnessing of technology in supply chain management, freer cross-border data flows, and greater regulatory coherence in digital trade protocols. Then again, the countries will need to adopt better economic policies and improve both forward and backward linkages to effectively be able to benefit from the resilient supply chains. I would say that country-specific steps are necessary if the initiative is to succeed. India, for instance, needs to simplify its labor laws, improve infrastructure, and improve its digital economy. Japan needs enhanced productivity, and Australia needs to mitigate the effects of high wages. And if we talk about the US in the Quad context, the US needs to improve and protect its technological progress as well. So to sum up, it is the enabling environment in the partner countries which aim to improve their supply chain resilience in a cooperative manner, which needs real focus and real improvement. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for nice presentation, Ambassador. So next presentation is Professor Sravani Roy Chaudhary. So she will talk about the economic architecture in the Indo-Pacific Indian challenge. Please start your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Sato, for chairing this session and giving me this opportunity. I would be essentially looking at the economic architecture that has been proposed and much talked about in the Indo-Pacific region and look at what is the India's challenge. Parul, next slide, please. The content would be introduction followed by comparisons of RCEP and CTPP, and then looking at the RCEP with or without India, and then the post-pandemic India's outlook. Next slide. As an introduction, let me just start off by giving a background to why this mega regional trade blocs did happen. And the major reason at that point of time was essentially economics in nature. The failure of the WTO, though around, followed by the need of most of these countries in this region to look at infrastructure, investment, services, and intellectual property, which is basically comes under WTO plus, was the reasons that lots of FTAs, RTAs started growing within this region. Having had this, whole lot of these trade agreements that proliferated within this region, we had from India also signing up the SEPA with Korea, then followed by Japan, followed by ASEAN. In all these negotiations, one could see a trend of certain options that was always an issue in these negotiations. For instance, for us in India, it was always the the rule of origin law, the question of whether how would we negotiate with respect to services, what would be the kind of people-to-people's movement, etc., was the main consideration for India, because each country was obviously, moving their negotiations on their strength and trying to find complementaries within the negotiations with whichever country they were doing. Effectively, what essentially ended up becoming is this: the problem that got initiated because of the issue of quality, as well as the noodle ball option that was created because of too many of these FTAs, RTAs being embroiled within the this Asia Pacific region. Parul, the next slide, please. So what, if you were to ask, is these two called mega trade blocks? You see the definition that was given by the World Economic Forum. It talks about an agreement in which there is a deep integration partnership in form of RTA between country or a region with a major share of the world trade and FDI, in which two or more of these parties are in a paramount drivers. If you look at both these blocks, you would see that you do have paramount drivers in both the blocks. In the RCEP, it is China, Japan, Korea making certain amount of strong moves, including, of course, is the ASEAN region, with essentially more pivoted on Indonesia and Vietnam at the moment. Similarly, if you see CPTPP, of course, USA left, but what is left of that group has emerged and has for the first time shown that something can go without the USA's leadership. And they have emerged as a bloc which has country like Japan taking the leadership. In fact, Japan is actually leading the group this year. Next slide, please. So if you look at the complexities that is there within this region, what does RCEP and CPTPP do is to take care of all the issues that could happen when you are in RTAs with each of these regions, and especially with ASEAN, China, ASEAN, Japan. Small differences are there. If you could do away with it, you would become one whole region, which could actually be like a place where no lower tariffs, so movement of goods, services, etc., becomes easy, and it actually promotes that what we call as multilateralize the region, and therefore takes care of the small differences, and puts together a region which will be free with respect to goods and services movements. However, each member has their own ambitions, and it is this ambitions that needs to be collated within the rules that is getting created for the trade and service movements, and that is where I think the whole problem arises. Next slide, please. If you look at the membership out here, you would realize that though we talk about it as an Indo-Pacific architecture, essentially it is tilted towards the Southeast Asia, because SAARC is left out. All the SAARC region, you see the Indo-Pacific, Indo part is minimized in this whole thing. The Pacific is there, but within the Pacific also, you do not see the major, like USA obviously being out, makes CPTPP also not as mega as it could have been if USA was there. Similarly with RCEP, it isn't as mega as the if India was within it, but we will look into it a little later. But what is interestingly happening is you have certain countries, like say for Vietnam, which has gone in for a separate FTA with EU and UK. Question is, if Vietnam has done it, will it, of course, lead other nations to go ahead and move into having EU and UK FTAs in lines with how Vietnam is done? If these progresses in these lines, we could actually look at a world where actually it would have more uniformity with respect to tariffs, with respect to services, movements, with respect to how you would negotiate, or where would the legal standings be. So it would make actually life a little more easier for both private and government to carry on if we could achieve this. But obviously the membership itself is a question, and where and who would be invited, whether they will have a chance to come in, is all a reason why these mega blocks would always be a question of, looking externalities that is beyond just the economic parameters, and all the geopolitics would be in place to create membership. So today, no longer is economic criteria as the major reason why memberships are taken and given. It is much more to do with the geopolitics of this region. Next slide, please. If you do a comparative of RCEP and CPTPP, if you look at the parameters in place, one realizes that while CPTPP is deep in the sense it's taken care of, gone beyond the WTO requirements and looked at movement of people, environment, labor, and has definitely put in place the state-owned enterprises issue. And that is one reason why China cannot be party to it. And China definitely would like it to not be part of the in its negotiation in CPTPP. But RCEP, on the rebound, allows for state-owned thing. It doesn't have much to do with labor. It has not quantified anything with respect to environment. And with people's movement, it has done only given very modest leanings. What is important for us to realize out here is RCEP is basically a very extensive thing, and trying to take care of the problems that originated because of the nodal valve syndrome. And therefore, it is only untying the knots and creating what is being the traditional style of operations. Whereas CPTPP is being much more foresighted, has gone in for certain extra miles with respect to inclusion of environment, with giving directions to how the labor would be things. So the extensive designing that has gone into CPTPP, essentially, therefore, people are now calling it to be probably the gold standard for the next round of trade ways of doing trade agreements. Next slide, please. So if you look at the whole thing and come to a conclusion on this RCEP versus CPTPP, you would see that the advanced category of new generation of free trade is what we could say these are actually looking towards, not only free flow of goods and services, but to also look at the political and social objectives related to free market and fair competition. As I said earlier, that in many areas like labor right protections, environment protection, and more importantly with the state-owned enterprise issue, CPTPP has gone ahead and made it much more visible, transparent, and concise, to the extent that we would expect that the movement towards this level of adherence will only will help the world in its climate change program, with its developmental consideration, and also probably bring in much more equity among the trading nations. Next slide, please. Now let's look at what has been India's challenge of, moving away from the RCEP and the kind of issues that was created because it was in place for so many years, and suddenly in 2019 we sort of moved away. Can we have the next slide, Charul? Parul? You look at the statements that were, given, and I could say that these are mainly the, major ways that people reacted to RCEPs, Japan, India moving out of RCEPs, and you have the Prime Minister, who said that it doesn't make any sense for me, and this was essentially to do with the FTAs that India had with ASEAN, with Japan, with Korea, and in each of this we had negatives with them, and it was only going downwards. But of course, you had the ASEAN's group which turned around and said that we would always want to move together, and we believe in moving together, and therefore it would be not fair to not have India in it. Of course, there were one set of RCEPs people who did talk about that India has missed the bus, and that it would be difficult for India to integrate into this region. And of course, it was, decided that it would leave the door open for India to join back. Next slide, please. Why was India's backing out? India initially had proposed a three-tier approach to the tariff reduction from its member countries, and it wanted a different way of approaching the whole thing, essentially keeping in mind its domestic economy, the fragility of the economy with respect to the fact that it had, it had a longer batting to do to reach the level of world competitiveness. So these were the three options that was given by India, which was obviously not accepted. And in many negotiations, if you look at it, it was said that it was India which was pulling back the negotiation. India was the bad boy out there. What had India said? India had asked that the ASEAN's, where it had relatively good equation with respect to its trade, 80% of the tariff lines should be decreased. With respect to the countries like Japan and Korea, where it had 6 SEPA, it would go for 65. And with the rest of the country like China, Australia, and New Zealand, it will be 42.5%. Next slide, please. With respect to special and differential preference, and this is essentially put in place, say, in ASEAN to take care of the less developed among the region countries like Laos. But with respect to the RCEP, India also put these conditions for itself, which basically meant that with respect to modulation of commitments, it wanted the gaps and preferences to be taken care of. With respect to trade, it wanted to have a preferential treatment, and as it was given to the, as it was quoted in the in other agreements where the developing countries give a less developed countries some leverages. With respect to the declaration of support, it was basically a developed nations providing various support schemes to a developing nation. India out here, you find India in a very peculiar situation in this aspect. India has grown. India's GDP has been one of the fastest growing GDP in this region. Yet India did ask for favors which seemed to be contradictory to what its economic growth pattern was. And it was basically because of this that most of the members of the RCEP did not agree to India being given the preferences with respect to special and differential treatment. Next slide, please. The second, and that was basically with the year of date of enforcement issue, whether it was to be used as 2014 or 2019 as India requested, because India had made changes in its tariff with respect to import tariffs, and they wanted to go by the 2019, which was not accepted because initial since the negotiation started in 2013, 2014 was taken as the base year. Next year, slide, please. The rule of origin has always been a problem with India. India had, with the SEPA in Japan, long negotiations were made with respect to the rule of origin, where the essential issue is where does a product really originate, how much of value addition is done, and how much of indigeneity of inputs have been made within the member country before it is exported to India. The reason why India has been very keen on this is simply because India always feared that China would send its products through these smaller developing nations into India without really the other nation really working towards any strong creation of value addition. Next slide, please. Special safeguard that India wanted, and I think this was something that India did a very wise task, which was essentially an auto trigger mechanism. That is, as soon as a certain level of goods and services would be reaching a certain threshold, automatically certain duties, etc., would automatically start being applied to the partner country. This was again a kind of a barrier that India wanted to create with respect to Chinese products into Indian market. Next slide, please. With respect to e-commerce, which is a new area of operations, the provisions that RCEPs wanted to follow was probably pretty similar to what US provisions are with respect to non-discriminatory treatment, etc. In this, the major issue that India had was that India had an issue of data residency. India was keen that the personal data protection bill, which India came up in 2019, should be accepted as a part where India would have the choice of how much they, will take a call of data leaving Indian shores. So it was the data residency which became a issue, and the counter argument was that it is not acceptable to have this because it actually hampers e-commerce. Next slide, please. The fourth and probably the most pertinent issue with India is in each of these countries, India's major advantages in the service sector pertaining to IT. And in the movement of natural persons, which is critical for India, India was not being favored by countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia in RCEP. And therefore, India wanted to move this in lines with others, and therefore, India called a shot of not joining the RCEP. Next slide, please. So, does India's exit really matter to RCEP? If you look at this current slide, I'm running a little short of time, so I'll push through this slide fast. If you look at it, it is really not true. Even between CPTPP and RCEP, you see that RCEP is supposed to be doing better than thing, because all this value chain, etc., supply chain that's come into picture so much during the pandemic is actually based within this region, and this region becoming open would only increase trade and activities and would actually profit this region. Next slide, please. But if you see the gain and loss out here, the dark black line is the gain line, is the RCEP with India, and the blue line is RCEP without India, that is 15 and 16. You see there are only marginal level of difference other than with respect to population, where we obviously are one of the most populous, second populous country in the world. And if you see, even in services, it is not much that the RCEP is losing out by not including or having India walked out of it. Next slide, please. So what is the option that you have economically for India right now? Obviously, closing on an EU and with EU and USA would be the best option. I think putting the domestic industry in place by our new initiatives that are coming up under the Atmanirbhar Bharat umbrella, aligning the foreign trade policy, phasing out import duty protection in a systematic fashion would be the core base on which we could work forward. But given the new areas of sectors that are opening up due to digitalization, due to the supply chain network that USA, in fact, today morning, I was reading that the USA has called for a different kind of supply chain network, such that it can, bring about a new decouple itself from the China-based supply chain. Would be the places where India should try to approach and see. There are issues of rare earth community, that is sector that is being talked about in the US plans. So these are the areas, I think, the new areas in which India should look forward and try to make plans accordingly, such that we could integrate with the world economy faster, rather than looking back at the previous value chain that existed with central focus on ASEAN and with China as the hub. Can we move to a different kind of networking system, which was what Anil Wadhwa was talking about, the blue dot economy, where we can place ourselves in a much more stronger footing, because I think we have the skill sets to do that. With this, I thank the audience for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sravani Roy Chaudhary. So very nice presentation. So next, I ask the Dr. Mathur to make a discussion and comments to two main speakers. Please
Thank
start.
you. Thank you very much. How much time do I have?
We just 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, no problem. That's enough. Thank you very much for having me, and it was a pleasure to read your paper, Ambassador Wadhwa, as always, and your presentation, Professor Shrabani. I have, in the interest of time, I think what I will do is I will then synthesize my comments into maybe one. What I'll do is I'll give one observation each on each of the presentations, and maybe one perspective of my own. So I think maybe starting with the second presentation first, Shrabani, you have laid out all the important elements of RCEP and TPP-11 or CPTPP very clearly. I think that the question it raises is that ultimately, does India have an economic architecture that we can plug into in the Indo-Pacific? And the answer to that, based on your remarks, is that we don't at the moment. And we have to think about what kind of architecture we want. We know that right now the dominant architecture in the Indo-Pacific is actually not Indo-Pacific, it's the Asia-Pacific. It's APEC which provides the undergirding, it provides the basic plumbing on which the economic arrangements and business is based on. So the question is, how do we create that economic architecture? And India's trade lines are moving, more than 50. I think it's now close to 55 to 60% of our trade is to developing nations, not advanced nations. So we're trying to make an effort to move our trading linkages away only from United States, Europe, or China, for that matter, towards ASEAN. And lots of people, our foreign ministry, commerce ministry, lots of people have put in a lot of effort to make this elephant change its direction. I think Ambassador Wadhwa captured all the elements so I mean, it was very nicely stitched together, all the things that India, Australia, and the Quad is doing. I want to highlight 2 or 3 things that he mentioned, because the Blue Dot Network and the supply chain resistance initiatives, I mean, these are particularly important for us to follow. I also want to mention that the IDFC, which is one of the results of the BUILD Act, which the United States has created as a successor for OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, is a really important development. In fact, when it happened 2-3 years ago, it happened because OPIC was, well, one, it was underfunded, but it required an upgrade so that the United States could move into and counter state-led foreign policy or foreign economic policy, with its own state-led institutions, and which the United States did not have. Because what the United States used to do was it used to just create the basic framework with FTAs and then unleash its private corporations. But it's found that that's not what was working anymore, and China had already learned to game that system. So IDFC is a very important evolution. How effective it is, of course, we will see as. I think that raises a question, Ambassador Wadhwa, that how do we align our capital and our trade objectives? We still have our capital coming from United States, Europe, and maybe a little bit from Japan, more development financing from Japan. But still, we have it from the Western countries. But our trade, we are trying to move it towards more developing nations. And this is a bit of a dichotomy. I mean, this is an aberration, because typically finance and trade would move together. And this at least is what happens in the transatlantic relations really, really effectively. But for us, we would have to depend on foreign capital to actually invest not back into those Western markets, but so that we can move our trade and service other markets in Africa, Latin America, ASEAN as we want to do. So I think it's a dichotomy. You do know that Japan is also a big investor. South Korea is coming up as an investor in Asia, a big investor. I mean, ASEAN half price is actually based primarily on Japan, not on China as it is currently being marketed. In fact, one of the reasons why the Asian financial crisis traveled really quickly from Thailand and from the Southeast Asian countries back to Japan is actually because it was a lot of the Japanese companies that were actually running those businesses. So there's definitely, definitely raises the question, how do we align our capital, where we source our capital from, where India sources capital from, and the destination where India actually wants to trade with, or who India wants to trade with. So I think those are the two observations on the two papers. And my own view is this. I think generally geoeconomics is not congruent with geopolitics. And I come back to my area of study, geoeconomics, that it is not congruent. I don't think it's automatically ever congruent, but there's always an effort to be made. But here it is, a lot of effort has to be made. In fact, it's a painful process to get them to align themselves with each other. There's a lot of effort being made to align them. I mean, the Indo-Pacific is a geopolitical construct, but it is still based on a very age-old geoeconomic construct, which is Asia-Pacific right now. So how do we align it? And here, my own perception and the recent observation is that actually the government is doing much more to make those alignments than businesses. A lot of these efforts, that Ambassador Vada mentioned, and some more, are all G2G-led efforts, where the government is trying, maybe say RCEP, the business is not willing, maybe for all the right reasons, but it's not willing. There is reluctance. And in fact, there's reluctance for geoeconomics to follow geopolitics everywhere in the world. The US-China trade war was a geopolitical move, and the businesses did not want to follow what Trump was doing. But I think it's a reality also. There is reluctance, but that's the reality. So I think I will leave you with this perspective that I think we will see a new set of efforts on trying to see how geoeconomics can be aligned with geopolitics. And in that case, for India, at least for India, empowering our firms is going to be fundamental to that, rather than just waiting on FTAs or putting the amount of energy we put in. And we put in good energy. I mean, the Commerce Ministry puts in some good energy, and we all have our list of issues that we can raise with the Commerce Ministry. But they put in, if that kind of energy was put into firms, in building out firms, that would go a longer way in making sure India has the right geoeconomic context to work up, because ultimately supply chains are determined by firms. Apple in San Francisco decides where it wants its phones to be manufactured. Toyota in Japan decides where it wants its supply chains to be based. It's not the Japanese government that decides it. So we want to put a little bit more attention on firms. But I will stop here. I think that was 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm sorry. Very, very limited time. So please do the reaction to the Dr. Mathura. Ambassador, please talk. Please mention something, but only 1 minute.
Professor Sato, one interjection, sorry. We also need to take, I don't know whether there are hands being raised that my students will let know. We might have to take 5 minutes from the next session and finish off with some Q&A from the audience.
Okay, we can extend 5 minutes more.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So I cannot identify who raised the hands. I try to identify.
If you go to go to the chat box and see raise hands, you will see hands raised. Mrityunjay Dubey.
Okay, Dr. Dubey, please give your comments, but only 1 minute. 1 minute question. Simplify. Dr. Dubey. Yes, please.
Good morning to all the panelists, and thank you for addressing me. And my question to any one of you will be, AI will be the driving force for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific post-COVID. So this question will be to the Ambassador Vadava. So what strategies or plans do we have on the table to tackle the challenges and opportunities that we'll be having as a result of the AI, artificial intelligence, in the Indo-Pacific? Do we have any strategies with our partners, that is Japan, Australia in particular, to tackle all the challenges arising due to artificial intelligence post-COVID-19?
Okay, thank you.
So thank you for that question. Partly I did try to answer that question when I was making the presentation. The trilateral initiative that was announced on 1st of September obviously takes into account technology and making sure that digitization is used as much as possible in order to build these resilient supply chains. And for that matter, it's very essential that the three countries work with ASEAN countries. Because without that, just working between themselves, this is not going to succeed to that extent that is required. So AI, of course, is something which will affect not just in Indo-Pacific but throughout the world. It's a very important concept now. But eventually, it will boil down, in my view, to the specific sectors which the three countries have already focused upon, which is about 10 sectors. They have their own favorites out of these 10. But if you put them all together, then they're all ones with which the three countries already deal with ASEAN. And the idea is to make sure that the bottlenecks in mutual trade with the ASEAN and between themselves is removed, and there is an assurance of supplies in these 10 sectors. So I think you're right in the sense that AI is a very important concept which will play a very important role in bringing about that acceleration in these supply chains. But we still have a long way to go in terms of in determining where exactly these will be applied, because so far, despite the fact that the three countries have announced that they will put this into effect by the end of last year, we are already nearing March, and we haven't seen that progress being made as yet. So I think it's going to take some more time, in my view, maybe by middle of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So I have a follow-up question to your answer.
Yeah.
So are
Go
you
ahead.
able to hear me?
Yeah.
So, sir, do we have, how prepared are the Indian youths in that matter, in the terms of their understanding of the artificial intelligence? We don't have enough Indian youths, from taking example of the top-notch universities in India, be that JNU itself. We don't have that many number of students or youths, even the PhD scholars who are prepared enough to tackle the challenges that will emerge out of AI. So how do you see that? And we have always given benign neglect to the Australia in terms of technological cooperation. And thanks to the latest initiative by the Quad Tech Network that was launched recently by the Australian National Security College in February only. So how prepared do we have the youths in India? Do we have any plan across the Indian universities as well to collaborate with our other partners in the Indo-Pacific region, primarily Japan, Australia, and US?
So this is of course, an ongoing, focus area of cooperation. India with ASEAN has also got a program for artificial intelligence, which is funded out of the ASEAN India Fund. Depending on where these centers are and where the interest lies, these projects are taking place or they're being expanded. But when you focus on Indian universities, I am a little skeptical about the depth to which we have gone in terms of explaining the implications of AI and the future impact it will have. Because largely universities focus on academics, but now the time has come, and I think the new education policy in India is going to focus more on that aspect of making it an all-round kind of education. And the fact that we will have further collaborations with outside universities will make it that much easier to have those influences and those exchanges. But there is certainly, and I agree with you, that there is certainly a need to focus much more in this aspect.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, sir.
Ambassador.
Thank you.
So, final reply from Professor Sravani Roy Chaudhary. Please give your reply to the Dr. Mathura.
Yeah, I also agree with Dr. Mathur with the respect of this construct of aligning between the politics and the economics, and how most often it doesn't really find a place in living together in the same house. However, I think, if economics was to drive this region, we would have to ask ourselves pertinent questions of how we can realign ourselves and create an architecture for ourselves. And I think that is where I also completely in line with the fact of empowering the private sector in being able to move and fight in the world market competitively and make a place for themselves. And if in the service sector we've improved ourselves, especially in the IT sector, and if the next industrial revolution that we're looking at has a strong advantage in being in a platform that we've been quite good at, I think we should be looking at something more futuristic rather than trying to look at the old sectors in which I think slowly we have been losing competitiveness to the ASEAN market.
So time is come. So thank you very much for fruitful discussion regarding the economic engagement in the Pacific region. So thank you very much. Many thanks again for nice presentation from Ambassador Wadhwani and Professor Shravani Roy Chaudhary, and very nice comments from Dr. Mathura. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to all the panelists and the participants. Everybody, once again. At the outset, I would extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to Chair from Kobe University. Thank you for being with us and enlightening us by your insightful presentation and guidance. I would like to thank Ambassador Anil, discussant Akshamat Chaudhary, and all the participants for such a wonderful presentation, which promises to set the future discourse on this particular topic among the young researchers and academics. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Makrand. Thank you
very much.
Panelists. We already have the next panelists all ready to go. It's our fifth session and the second session today, and we are looking at Japan and its partners in Indo-Pacific. Could I please ask the panelists to switch on their videos as well as test out their mics?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Horikoto Sensei?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. What about...
I'm sure you can hear me, Shravani, and everyone else. Gautam Bambawale here.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is Jayanti Naidu. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay.
How are you?
Hi.
How are you? Good.
Dr. Wilkinson's and Tamari Sensei.
Yes, sorry, I'm just having some problems with my camera. I think that WebEx may be open twice, so I might come out and come back in again. It was working
sure.
yesterday.
Take your time.
Just bear with me, thanks.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Tamari Sensei. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. A little louder, please.
Okay.
Tamari.
Okay.
Yeah, this is better. This is better. Oh, you're much more well prepared for this.
Yeah.
Just give us 2 minutes, Horimoto Sensei. We can start then. We are, of course, running late by 15 minutes almost now. But I am going to extend it by another 15 minutes.
Okay, that's no problem.
So please bear with us.
Yeah.
Hi, Sandeep.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bamba, sir.
Dr. Wickens, we can see your, are you able to move it? Dr. Wickens, we can also share your slides if you so want to.
There's some problem with audio. Can't hear.
Ma'am, I think he's having problems to like stop sharing the screen, and he hasn't unmuted.
Dr. Wilkins, could you please unmute yourself? No, you have to unmute. Otherwise, you can't hear. There's no audio. There's a button unmuted. Just press on that.
There's a red button next to your video button, which if you need to unmute yourself, it'll go green then. Professor Wickens, if you want to, we can do your sharing. You can just stop from there. We can help you share your slides. I have it with me.
No, audio is the problem, Shavani. So unless he unmutes, we can't hear him. We can see him. There's no issue with video.
Probably he's not listening. He's not able to listen our voices.
Okay, he can't hear us.
I've sent him a request to unmute.
Okay.
Ma'am, I think he's unable to find the button to unmute himself because he can't stop sharing the screen.
Oh, he's not able to.
Yes, yes. I don't think
I can only, because he's from Australia, I can only email him.
So if you can hear us, can you please show us like a thumbs up? We can then remove you for the meeting and let you back in.
He's not able to listen.
Okay. He can hear us. He can hear us.
Okay, that's
yeah. Chandrali, can you? It's okay.
Done. Can you email him that he can join back?
I wrote maybe share your slides. Parul, be ready with the slides, please.
Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. He's back.
Let me just start the session, I think, or should we?
Oh, at last I managed to unmute it. All of the buttons disappeared for some absolutely unknown reason. It was totally fine yesterday when I checked it. Right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, and I hope it all doesn't go wrong again. I'm terribly sorry about this.
We can share your slides, and you can just say next, and they will move it to the next. Yeah. Okay with you?
Okay. Yes, I think that's it. That's probably the best thing.
I think we'll do that then. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. We start off with the session 5, and I would ask my students to first give an introduction to the panelists, and before they hand it over to the chair. Over to you, dear student, who is doing it today?
Yeah, I'll be doing it. I'll be introducing.
Yeah.
I would like to share my screen, but
Dr. Wickens.
Am I sharing now? It looks like it's sharing.
The student would be first sharing a slides on the introductory part of the panelists. So if you could.
Oh, okay. Okay, but it's open now and it will share, I think. So
you'll have to stop sharing for the moment.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason.
Right. It was all fine yesterday.
Very warm welcome to everyone to today's session number 5. And it is Japan and its partner in the Indo-Pacific. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists and chair for this session. We have our chair, Professor Takenori Horimoto, who's currently a professor at Gifu Women's University and senior fellow of Center of Contemporary Indian Studies of JIA. After Professor Shibu Shobi University Graduate School, professor of Kyoto University Graduate School, and he has also been a member of study committee on contemporary India and South Asian politics organized by ministries such as Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finance, Economy, Trade and Industry, think tanks and university. He has single authored and edited 15 books. We welcome you, sir. Next, we have Dr. Thomas Wilkins. He's a senior research fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs and a senior lecturer in the International Security at the University of Sydney. He has received his PhD from University of Birmingham, UK, and completed his postdoctoral studies at the University of San Francisco and East West Center, Honolulu. Since then, he has been with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Taiwan Fellow, Japan Foundation Japanese Studies Fellow, and JSPS Promotion JSPS Fellow at both at University of Tokyo. He specializes in security issues at the Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, and has published on these subjects in journals such as Review of International Studies, Asia Policy, and Australian Journal of International Affairs, among others. He's currently an associate editor for the Journal of Pacific Affairs and co-area editor in the Japanese Studies Journal, Australia. His latest monograph is entitled as Security in Asia Pacific, The Dynamics of Alignment, published with Line Reiner Press. Next, we have Professor GVC Naidu. He's a former founder, chairperson of the Center of Indo-Pacific Studies, Jawaharlal University. He specializes in Indo-Pacific affairs, including political economy, maritime security, and India's engagement with this region. His visiting appointments include Research Fellow at Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, Japan Foundation visiting professor at Daito Bunka University and Gakushuen University, Tokyo. He's also been visiting fellow at the East-West Center, Honolulu, Japan Institute of International Affairs, visiting professor at National Chengchi University, Taipei, and visiting professor at National Chung Tsing University, Taichung, Taiwan. He has his credit 5 books, 5 monographs, and large number of articles, chapters in books, and research paper published in India and abroad. Next, we have Dr. Kazutoshi Tamari. He's an associate professor of policy studies and graduate school of economics, Chukyo University, Nagoya, Japan. He received his MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2010 and PhD from Chuo University in 2013. His area of expertise is international relations and India's major power politics. His recent publications include Introduction to Contemporary Japan-India Relations, Post-Cold War East Asian Order, India in the Future, and India's Vision on Post-Corona World. Now I'll hand it over to my research fellow Naresh to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Swati. The next panelist we have Dr. Sandeep Mishra. He is an associate professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Earlier, he worked at the University of Delhi for more than 12 years. He is also an honorary fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and a distinguished fellow at Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, New Delhi. He writes monthly column and name East Asia Compass at the IPCS website and another column to the Korea Times newspaper. Dr. Sandeep completed his master's degree in international politics from Jawaharlal Nehru University and obtained his MPhil and PhD degree from the same university. He studied Korean language in Korea in 2006 and 2010 at Yonsei University and Solang University. He has been visiting fellow and visiting scholar at Korea National Defense University, Northeast Asia University, History Foundation, Kim Dae-jung Presidential Library and Museum, Institute for Foreign Studies, Kyungnam University, Sejong University, and Korean Institute for International Economic Policy. He has published several articles in Indian and East Asian academic journals, along with book chapters, and contributed opinion articles to newspapers such as Korea Times, Times of India, Indian Express, Financial Express, Pioneer, Tribune, and Statesman. And next panelist we have. The next panelist we have Gautam Bambawale sir. He is a retired ambassador and was a member of Indian Foreign Service from 1984 to 2018. He was Indian ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China. Bambawale was stationed in Washington, D.C. in 2004 till 2007 during his Indo-US nuclear deal, which transformed ties between the two countries. He has been India's first Consul General to Guangzhou, China in 2007 and 2009. He was director of Indian Culture Center, Berlin from 1994 to 98. Ambassador Bambawale worked in Prime Minister Office from 2002 to 2004. At the Ministry of External Affairs, he was Joint Secretary for East Asia from 2009 to 2014. Bambawale has dealt with China for 15 years of his 34 years diplomatic career. Ambassador Bambawale is currently Distinguished Professor, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, Symbiosis International University, Pune, India. He is also a senior advisor on the Indian Riding Hill Frames, Ola. The next, we have discussant Sir Jubin T. Jacob. He is an associate professor in the Department of International Studies and Governance Studies at the Sikh Nadu University, Greater Noida, and adjunct research fellow at the National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi, India. He was formerly fellow and assistant director at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. Jacob's research interests include Chinese domestic politics, China-South Asia relation, Sino-Indian border areas, India and Chinese worldview, and Central Province relation in China. Having introduced the panel, now I would like to hand over the proceeding to the chair. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And now, this session is session 5, India and its partners in the Indo-Pacific. In a sense, the previous session, session 4, is mainly considered Indo-Pacific from the perspective of economy, whereas this session is going to discuss, going to consider the geopolitics. And we have 5 presenters. First presenter is Professor Thomas. He's talking about Australia-Japan Special Strategic Partnership and Rule-Based Order. Could you please start your presentation? Professor Wilkinson.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Professor Rao Choudhury, for inviting me to this webinar. I've been following some of the previous sessions, and the discussion has been absolutely superb, and I think this follows on very nicely from the themes and topics that have been raised so far. So can I just check that everybody can see the PowerPoint screen now? Yes, okay, phew. Nothing ever works when it's your time in the limelight. So, okay, hopefully you should be okay now. So, first of all, just to give a quick disclaimer that the views that I express here are not the official views of the Japan Institute for International Affairs, but my own personal commentary. So I realize time is tight, so I'll just give you a quick outline of the sort of things that I want to cover in this. I'm just going to flip very quickly through a bit of background information, and I've already supplied the slides for circulation if anyone wants to follow up on these, but these are really just a list of important events for reference. Then I'm really going to concentrate my discussion firstly on how the Australia-Japan Strategic Partnership is engaged in multifarious ways to uphold the rules-based order, to look what drives the Australia-Japan Strategic Partnership. And then I'll just broaden the conversation a little bit to put the bilateral relationship into its broader regional context and connect it with some of the other issues and themes that have been discussed so far about the United States, China, and India and their roles in the Indo-Pacific region. So I'll provide a little bit of background history, which I shan't go through, but we might flip back to that for reference if necessary later. So about the history of what we call Nichigo, Japan-Australia relations. And then really just a list here, which is all of this is easily accessible, and the slides will be provided on request on how they've really made an enormous amount of effort to build up this bilateral strategic partnership relationship since the mid-2000s. And this has occurred, I think, as we'll hear from one of the other speakers on this panel, very much in parallel with Japan's build-up of relations with India as well through the same strategic partnership mechanism. Anyway, I'll refer back to a couple of these, but these are just a checklist. I'd really prefer to concentrate on that analysis rather than just walking you through these. So, what is the Japan-Australia Special Strategic Partnership? Well, this was the term that was coined in 2014 at the height of bilateral relations between the Abbott and the Abe governments. But I've noticed that people, especially in Japan, have also started referring to it as a quasi-alliance. So we've got to be a bit careful about exactly what this is and what it isn't. The Japan-Australia Strategic Partnership, and the same goes for other strategic partnerships of which there's absolutely which have absolutely proliferated. And India, of course, is also a major actor on the strategic partnership scene. So I argue this is a new type of security alignment. It's a non-alliance that is founded on 3 pillars: a security pillar, and an economic pillar, which I'll focus on today. And then of less interest to us, perhaps for the discussion here, is the societal pillars, the people-to-people links. And most recently, I just stumbled on the fact that on the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website, they've actually produced a partnership agenda between Australia and Japan, which you can go and check out. And you can see this agenda has just grown and grown and grown now, so that Australia and Japan are practically doing virtually everything together. I mean, there's so many different levels of cooperation. It's quite a formidable agenda. This is backed up with a heavy degree of institutionalization, which gives it some real concrete substance as a bilateral security actor in the broader Indo-Pacific. So it was effectively founded with the Joint Declaration of on Security Cooperation in 2007. And since then, the partners have engaged in annual leadership summits, annual 2+2 foreign and defense minister meetings. There's a free trade agreement, or as Japan calls them, economic partnership agreements. And we also engage with an increasing tempo in both bilateral and multilateral military exercises, and are also exploring defense and technology cooperation. This now has meant that for Australia, as much as for Japan, that the strategic partnership has actually become a fixture in their national foreign and security policies. I mean, it's something that they act in reference to all the time, and it has bipartisan support in both countries. So, what is it that drives the relationship, and how does it bear upon this question of rules-based international order and Indo-Pacific order that we're really trying to get to the heart of? Well, in essence, it's a form of secondary power cooperation, sometimes called middle power cooperation. Australia is certainly a middle power. Japan, more controversially, can be considered as a middle power. It has a certain array of great power capabilities, economics, population, and so forth. But it acts pretty much on the international scene very similar to other so-called middle powers. It practices effectively middle power diplomacy. So regardless of whether you agree or not with that characterization, that seems to have sort of stuck to these two countries as they act in concert. So they basically cooperate diplomatically to uphold regional security in the rules-based order. The most recent statements that came out, joint statements that came out at the end of 2020, were very significant. It appeared to show that Australia was effectively backing the free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP as we call it in the trade. And the principles of the FOIP, respect for free trade, rules-based order, respect for international law, I mean, we all be quite familiar with the content of the FOIP, are effectively now at the top of the partnership agenda as a mission statement. In order to achieve these objectives, they invest a great deal, as you would expect from secondary or middle powers within the region, those that are not superpowers, in supporting regional multilateralism. They particularly highlight the East Asia Summit as being the premier forum that they would like to kind of see as the, as the premier forum amongst the huge alphabet soup of institutions across the Asia-Indo-Pacific, also the ASEAN Regional Forum. And they also both act together as kind of a nucleus or a core of extended regional partnerships with other secondary powers, including Southeast Asian countries, India, of course, Korea as well, ideally, although Japan obviously has some issues with South Korea. So the institutional architecture is an important facet of where they cooperate to champion and lead this architecture according to their preference. They also work again within the economic sphere in terms of economic governance. So when the United States pulled out of the TPP, and I think it was 2017, they decided together to continue and to take up the leadership of what is now called the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement towards Trans-Pacific Partnership. They also have their bilateral economic partnership agreement, within which they're trying to work on issues that were mentioned in the previous panel about diversifying supply chains, access to critical mineral resources, and so forth. They've always been supporters. Indeed, they championed the Asia-Pacific economic cooperation, and of course, they're quite keen also on the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. They also coordinate their official development assistance, especially with regard to the Pacific Island countries. Now, underlying this kind of regional governance that is aimed at upholding the rules-based order under the banner of the FOIP, they also engage in a great deal of practical security cooperation, which is growing all the time, particularly non-traditional security issues, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, maritime issues, non-proliferation, human security, cybersecurity, and they're expanding their cooperation all the time. Of course, the virtue of this is that when you cooperate with military assets and interoperability on these non-traditional security issues, you're also able to build up trust and familiarity should more high-intensity conflicts arise. And that comes through the joint military exercises. Another thing that that is particularly welcome for Japan is Australia's support for Japan's so-called normalization as a regional security power. So Australia has really stepped out of the pack to support Japan's peace and security legislation, collective defense, which also applies to collective defense between Japan and Australian military assets. And overcoming history issues, which of course are all impediments to Japan playing a more of a leading security role in the region, opposed by the Koreas and China. So let me just look at the broader implications for what they do together internally bilaterally. Now, this is a kind of interesting thing in terms of the implications for their bilateral partnership with the US. So it's almost a kind of a Janus-facing instrument of security cooperation. On the one hand, it paradoxically reinforces the US alliance system and the rules-based order that the United States has now hopefully returned to after doing its best to demolish it under Donald Trump. It supports the American Indo-Pacific strategy and FOIP, which is embedded in that. And it works to connect together the spokes, both Australia, Japan themselves, but also within other mini-lateral networks. The US, Japan, Australia trilateral strategic dialogue being the most concrete of these, but also the Australia, Japan, India trilateral, and of course the Quad that we've been talking about quite a lot these days as well. But then, interestingly, as well as supporting the US alliance system and US primacy, which of course is fading incrementally, it also hedges against either structural decline on the part of the United States or a return to unreliability. Of course, Trump was notoriously unsupportive of US alliances in Asia and did a great deal to undermine the liberal international order, all of the things that Australia and Japan stand for. So that was a salutary lesson to the two countries, and they did a great deal to try and uphold that individually and outside of the US's absence. So they went ahead with the CPTPP, hoping to keep the seat warm for an American return to the TPP later on. And of course, they prefer to do this not only bilaterally, but also to bring in other like-minded partners, other so-called middle powers in concert that have the same concerns, Korea, India, and so forth. So let me just have a look about how this relates to China, because when we talk about rules-based order, we can't but mention China's challenges or perceived challenges to this order. What has catalyzed this relationship is certainly their shared concerns about assertive Chinese behavior in undermining the regional rules-based order in the South China and East China Seas. But one of the things that is kind of interesting here is, and I think this speaks to this notion of strategic partnerships itself, which, I've been really working deeply on this, and it's something that I want to try and persuade people of. But strategic partnerships are not alliances. Neither Japan or Australia see China as a direct military threat at this stage. It could change, but at this stage, it's more perceived as a risk. And so these strategic partnerships are kind of security risk management strategies or vehicles. China's none too happy about the strategic partnership, particularly its recent upgrading in 2020 with the so-called reciprocal access agreement negotiations. The Global Times went on record saying that Australia and Japan were setting a bad example by hyping the so-called China threat. And so this has led to some sort of discussions and debates within the partnership in the middle paragraph there. Perhaps the last thing, just for sake of time, I would like to emphasize, rather than get into that in detail, is the new emphasis that's been put on economic security by these partners. So economic security has risen to the top of the agenda alongside strategic security and non-traditional security concerns for these countries. partly because of COVID, but also because of the Chinese economic coercion that Japan experienced previously in 2010, and that Australia is now reeling from. So they intend to use the partnership to mitigate some of the effects of that Chinese economic coercion, both through their economic partnership agreement, and in minilateral forums to provide infrastructure and development and connectivity to the region as an alternative to the BRI, but also to work together to diversify trade and supply chains so that they're better able to resist any future coercive actions by Beijing. So just finish off by saying, in terms of this sort of sounds like a very impressive agenda, and it sounds like they're doing a lot of things, and that's absolutely true. But we have to understand that there's one or two little drawbacks with the partnership. The first is, and it's a very minor one that's kept quarantined from the big questions of sort of power politics, is that Australia and Japan disagree about international whalings. That's one little irritant in the relationship. Another is the difficulty in transforming such a strategic partnership into a traditional formal military alliance, because neither country, as I said, perceives China as a direct military threat. And so this will be rather provocative. There's a lot of debate actually going on in Australia at the moment about Japan's recent attempts to encourage Australia to lend more support for the Japan as territorial sovereignty in the East China Sea, the Senkaku Shoto, and how this might lead to conflict with China. And then lastly, before we get too carried away with the impact and the influence that these two countries can have, I mean, they're certainly not insignificant countries, especially so Japan with its third largest global economy. There's a certain degree of limitations in terms of the bilateral capability and capacity of the partnership. Really, both of the countries would like to have US support and can be more effective with US support. They also, of course, want to bring India in to bolster their relations and try and use the partnership in combination with other instruments. Okay, I might just round up there because I think I'm running out of time. So that's all I'd like to say on that, but just to introduce you into what the partnership's about, what it's doing, and its potential significance to the region. Thank you very much for your attention. I think the chair's mic is muted.
So you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Just hold on, please. Okay, is it possible now? Yes. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and particularly your frank opinion about the bilateral relation between the two countries. It has been really interesting for me to know and such a view of things of the two countries. Now, the second speaker is Professor Katsutoki Tamari. He's speaking on the India-Japan relations in Japan in the Pacific. Please.
Thank you, Horimoto Sensei. Let me share my slides. Can you see full screen? Right?
It's on a vertical alignment. Make it into a horizontal alignment, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Make it PPT alignment. I think it is on a PDF format.
PDF is not ready. Let me try. Change the setting. Oh.
You know, I think Tamari-san, you have to save it as PPT.
Okay. Just a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Now just keep that and share.
Okay. Sorry. Just a moment, please.
Tamari.
It's all right. We can go ahead with the presentation.
Yeah,
Really,
I think it's there. It's
yeah,
there now.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Great.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think now it's okay, right?
It is fine, Tamari-san. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Chair Horimoto Sensei, and I'd like to thank to Center for East Asian Studies, SISJNU, Japan Foundation, and especially Professor Shravani Roy Chaudhary for giving me this precious opportunity. Actually, it is sad that I'm not able to return to my alma mater, JNU, this time. I hope soon we will be able to move freely around the globe, and we will meet each other. So today, I'm talking from my office in Churio University, Nagoya, Japan. I'll talk about Indo-Japan relations in Japan's Indo-Pacific policy. My paper consists of 3 parts: genesis, difference, and convergence. The first section shows how the Indo-Pacific has been used in India-Japan relations, especially in the early years. The second part, difference, analyzes the divergence on the Indo-Pacific policy between India and Japan, and the Shangri-La speech in June 2018. And the third part, convergence, shows how Japan came close to India in that perspective. Today, I'd like to focus on the third part because the content of first 2 parts have been discussed enough yesterday and the day before yesterday. In the third section, I'm going to look at Tokyo's policy change from strategy to vision in 2018. First section, Genesis. I'll flip this slide. Then let's take a brief review by using this timeline. As you know, FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, was announced in Kenya in August 2016, but it was not the starting point of the Indo-Pacific. The term Indo-Pacific itself was introduced by Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State of the United States at that time. Then we started to discuss about it. Japanese government officially started using it in 2014. I think it was November 2014. Sorry, October 2014. In Japan diplomatic arena, for the first time, it appeared in Prime Minister Abe's meeting with Indian counterpart, Mr. Modi, in Brisbane, Australia, in November 2014. Prime Minister Abe proposed to add to Japan-India relations a standpoint of contributing to the stability and development of Indo-Pacific to Mr. Modi. And Prime Minister Modi accepted it, according to Ministry of Foreign Affairs Japan. But there is not written in India's MEA, Ministry of External Affairs website. Anyway, after that, for a while, the Indo-Pacific was almost exclusively used in India-Japan relations. Then the FOIP appeared in 2016. The US also adopted it in the next year. I'll skip over the well-known things about them. Second part, difference. I'm just going to say one thing here. India's Indo-Pacific policy, which was presented by Prime Minister Modi in Shangri-La speech, was different from that of Japan and the United States at the time. This has already been discussed in this conference as well, so I'll go next. Then, third and main part of my paper, it elaborates a policy change of Japanese government. Tokyo changed wording on the Indo-Pacific from free and open Indo-Pacific strategy to the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The new phrase was shown by Prime Minister Abe in his regular liaison meeting of the government and ruling parties on November 12th, 2018. But based on this remark, it seemed regular comment, but based on this remark, some Japanese media reported that the government has changed the policy of Indo-Pacific. In fact, after that, Tokyo stopped calling the Indo-Pacific a strategy and has called it a vision since then. It was not a change of wording, but also a change of policy. Vision, is much more moderate than strategy. So I analyzed why and when the change was made. Let's start from when the decision was made. These are the events before and after the meeting. The recent meeting, where the new phrase was used for the first time, took place 2 days before the ASEAN-Japan summit meeting. So we can assume that the new word was prepared for the sake of its relations with ASEAN countries. In fact, the wording of the joint statement of the summit uses the word view for the Indo-Pacific, though not vision, but similarities can be found. The statement is in the next slide, but today I'll skip the detail of this. This ASEAN aspect, ASEAN factor, is one of the element for the policy change. Then take a look at events before the new policy appearance. It was preceded by 2 major diplomatic events. First, Prime Minister Abe had visited China in October 25 to 27th. It was a very important outing that symbolized the improvement of Japan-China relations in his term. Considering the timing, one might assume that the language change from strategy to vision was made at Beijing's request, but this was false speculation. Second, on the same day when Prime Minister Abe returned from China, Prime Minister Modi arrived at Japan. Abe invited Modi to his villa in Yamanaka to show their close relationship. The summit, the Japan-India summit meeting, was the immediate preceding event to the new vision speech. Therefore, it is unnatural to suppose that the 2 leaders did not discuss the Indo-Pacific at that time. So at that time, some experts in Japan speculated that Abe changed his mind after some kind of exchange in the meeting with Mr. Modi. But actually, these speculations were not right. They were not true. Again, Tokyo had done the decision of change of language before the summit meetings. According to an article which is based on internal sources of government, Tokyo had decided to stop using strategy a little earlier, by September at the latest. In fact, the FOIP strategy was not mentioned in his general policy speech on October 24th. Therefore, we can say the decision was made prior to the summit meetings. Next, why did Tokyo change its wording on FOIP? There were two main perspectives behind the decision, in my understandings. The first is China factor. Tokyo had decided to separate the connectivity economic issues from its security problems with China, and expressed Japan's support for China's Belt and Road Initiative in the previous year, 2017. It was not just words, they agreed to establish a committee for business cooperation, cooperation in third countries in May 2018. And the first meeting was held in September in Beijing. The Japanese government decided to locate the FOIP not as a framework, geopolitical framework for confrontation with China, but as a means of cooperation in connectivity. That's the main explanation for the policy change. The second is India-ASEAN factor. According to an anonymous Japanese government official, this is more important element. Tokyo realized that the Indo-Pacific strategy will not bring it in line with India and ASEAN countries, and therefore changed the wording. These are two main aspects for the policy change. Not one or the other, but both reasons were in fact present. Then, which is more important? Apart from the source I mentioned, I personally believe that the China factor was more important. Abe's China visit was the biggest event for Japanese foreign relations at that time. Comparatively, its relationship with India and ASEAN countries was less on an issue. I mean, relations with them were going well. So changing character of politics with China was much bigger issue, I think. This is public opinion toward China in Japan and India, but today I'll skip it. This is the last slide conclusion. Policy implications of Japan's Indo-Pacific has changed. It was originally a geopolitical framework countering China, but now it's a vision for cooperation on connectivity issues, which can be open even for China. Sometimes this is said by government officials now. The policy shift is symbolized in the change of wording from strategy to vision in 2018. And there are two main reasons for the change. One is to improve its relationship with China. And second, to share and cooperate on the Indo-Pacific with India and ASEAN countries. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you, and sorry for some troubles. Thank you so much.
Horimoto Sensei. Horimoto Sensei, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Professor Tamari, and then a very interesting presentation, including this change of the policy of the Japanese government from the strategy to vision. That is very, very interesting aspect of this in this period. Now, the third speaker is Professor Naidu, and he is speaking on the India independence and the Quad. Professor Naidu, please.
Please speak closer to your mic.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the third presenter is Professor Naidu. Please go on.
Thank you, Professor Horimoto Sensei. It's been quite some time we met. Thank you. Thank you, Shravani, for inviting me to make a presentation in this really big, massive conference. Actually, the original, I was not sure, in which session my paper was going to be. Professor Shravani requested me to do something on India, Indo-Pacific, and the Quad. So I kept Japan out. And once I realized that, Dr. Tamari-san is going to make a presentation on India, Japan, I skipped the Japan part. Otherwise, there would have been a lot of overlap and would have been speaking almost the same things. So what I'm going to do is, next 15 minutes time, make a broad overview of what are India's perspectives, looking from my angle on the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. So the paper, whoever has got the paper, is a fairly detailed one, 7,500 words, and it covers quite a bit of ground. But I'm not going to go into all those details. But basically, I'm going to I hope. Okay, just a minute. Oops, the slides are not moving. Just 1 minute, please. Just
yeah, there is an arrow on the bottom end, Naidu.
Oops.
Side. There are arrows left hand side of your slide, up and down. You can go down or up.
That's what I can't find them.
Left hand, just go on, put your cursor on slide, then the left hand side of the screen. I can, suppose I can go to your next slide. Look, next slide.
It's not moving.
In case you say next, I can. You tell me
Okay,
next.
I have a standby computer, so let me activate that.
Okay, look.
Okay.
Let's start with here.
Naidu, I can change it for you.
No. Yeah, I tried, it was working, but I don't know what happened. Okay. Anyway, so what I have, a standby computer. I knew there would be some issues of this kind. Okay. Okay. I'll use the other computer. Okay. I can see the slides here. So basically, I have about 4 or 5 major categories or set of issues which I'm going to deal with very, very briefly and very succinctly. Brief backdrop, for instance, Indo-Pacific has progressed from a conceptual stage to emerge as a new reference point. It's no more a concept, it's no more an idea. It is a new reference point. It's a new framework of analysis. Simply because it reflects the current realities far better than any other we have had in the past. It is gaining ground partly because it reflects not just the geostrategic, geopolitical the environment in the vast region, but also geoeconomic realities. That I think most people tend to ignore the geoeconomic realities. which I would like to keep in mind, all of you to keep in mind that in economics is security in East Asia. Go across anywhere, they talk about economics and finance, money, and how to make money. That I think plays a very significant role. And there is also growing realization or acknowledgement that the Indian Ocean and the West Pacific Oceans, which had been historically together in the past for since ancient times, but got segregated during the colonial period interlude. They're coming together once again for a variety of reasons. Either because of strategic reasons, of economic reasons, or trade, sea-lanes of communication, you name it. So these two oceans are coming together. That's what exactly Abe-san talked about when he made the address to the Indian Parliament back in 2007. Confluence of the two seas. That was the germination of the idea of the Indian Ocean and Western Pacific getting closer. And increasingly, if we look at from US to Japan, from India to Australia, including ASEAN, they are formulating either you call it strategy or vision, but certainly centered on the Indo-Pacific concept. I think that is very, very important. Next comes the Quad. Quad 2.2. It's what started as a dialogue mechanism. It's not confined to dialogue anymore, and it is a dialogue still, of course. But it goes far more than dialogue. So that's what I'm going to deal with that very quickly on Indo-Pacific. So it's been more than a decade that we've been talking about the Indo-Pacific idea. Still, it's vague. You ask anybody, hey, what is this Indo-Pacific? So we all say that, oh, Indian Ocean and Western Pacific Ocean together. But are there any commonalities? What are the meant to talk about a reason? There has to be boundaries. You can't include everything on earth and say that this is one reason. But unfortunately, in Asia, we always had this problem of demarcating, delineating reasons. If you really look at, the Europeans came out with this idea of Oriental and Occidental. And Oriental included, from their perspective, everything from Turkey to all the way up to Japan and, prominently India and China in between. So the idea of, the reason, okay, one should not really be, cut up with that, geographical boundaries, are dynamic in nature. And, for instance, Tenshin Okakura-san talked about Asianism. So he was he talked about an early 20th century view in terms of, how civilizational, historical, and cultural aspects played a significant role in creating an Asian identity. So he was talking about what today we talk about, the Indo-Pacific, from India all the way up to Japan and China and Southeast Asian regions. So it is broad, contours, reasons, sub-reasons, the way we understand are basically imaginary. That's my contention. And they're flexible. In sense, boundaries have always been flexible. If one keeps that in mind, I'm talking about basically East Asia, Asia, it becomes much easier to appreciate, the idea of the Indo-Pacific. We also had in between, the World Bank coming out with an East Asian miracle. Then East Asia became prominent. More as a geo-economic concept, but also increasingly it's being used as a geo-strategy concept as well. When it comes to India, while Japan came out with this basic idea that led to the germination of the Indo-Pacific back in 2007, but it took a while for it to to take a tangible shape. Both Australia and New Zealand came out, Australia and Japan came out in 2017 very clearly statements, as Tamari-san rightly pointed out, about the Indo-Pacific. In fact, if we really look at the same year, late in 2017, Trump made a major pitch for the Indo-Pacific. US even went to the extent of changing the name of the Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command, based in Honolulu. In fact, India was one of probably the last country to to make an open categorical statement on the Indo-Pacific when Prime Minister spoke at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018. So India's dilemmas stemmed from its well-established policies such as the Lucas policy or Actis policies, and its policy towards the Indian Ocean, its engagement with the African and Persian Gulf. So India already had well-established, look-is policy, act-is policy towards Indian Ocean. It was vigorously pursuing a new engagement policy with Persian Gulf and African countries. So where does the Indo-Pacific would fit in? So that was one of the dilemmas that India was faced with. And Prime Minister Modi also had come out with the idea of SAGA, security and growth for all in the region. Basically, he was talking about Indian and Western Pacific regions, Sagar, which means ocean in Sanskrit. So he spoke the Shangri-La in terms of inclusiveness, openness, and ASEAN centrality and unity. Therefore, lie at the heart of the new Indo-Pacific. So it was still kind of tentative without really looking at what exactly India was trying to get at, aspiring to play a role in this vast region. India does not see Indo-Pacific strategy, but as a club of limited members. The inclusiveness is so basically send a message or allay whatever the concerns China might have about the Indo-Pacific. So that is but at the same time there is underlying the current of greater security and other cooperation dialogue with the other countries, especially with US and Japan to begin with. They talked, almost everyone uses the same kind of the basic things. For instance, rules-based regional order, freedom of navigation, unimpeded commerce and peaceful settlement of disputes, and open and balanced and stable trade environment, connectivity. So these are some of the basic things India has also been kind of parroting or advocating along with others. And Modi specifically in his speech mentioned about one thing that it's normal to have partnerships on the basis of shared values and interests. So this is to basically send a message that just because India has got partnerships on the basis of shared values doesn't mean that any new initiative, new steps are targeted at any particular country, meaning China. So that kind of laid the pitch for India to take on from there. The speech, the Shangri-La speech, and realizing that much of the Indo-Pacific action was going to be the maritime domain. Prime Minister Modi came out with the new initiative called Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiatives that he outlined in his speech to the East Asian Summit in November 2017. It is supposed to be a cooperative effort to translate principles for the Indo-Pacific into measures to secure our shared maritime environment. And he enumerated 7 areas of cooperation such as maritime security, maritime ecology, maritime resources, disaster management, etc. Both Australia and Japan have shown interest in the initiative. It is still at the conceptual stage. It has not really taken off concretely. In the meantime, China came out with the Belt and Road Initiative. We all know that one of the massive enterprises ever undertaken by any country probably in the history, which eventually would involve something like $1 trillion investments. So one of the the major component of the BRI is the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So that really played a key role in embracing India embracing the Indo-Pacific concept. Till that time, there was considerable vagueness and reticence and hesitancy to really go the whole hog with the Indo-Pacific framework. So the CPEC, which many Indians felt, especially the policy circles, that that was insensitive on the part of China to include the disputed territories in the Kashmir region. But there is also great, slowly realized that India also realized that Indo-Pacific offers India a pivotal position, and it can aspire to play a crucial role in the vast region that's rising. If you really look at, despite all the talk about look-is policy, act-is policy, India was really not at the center of the East Asian security or economic debate. Partly because of its own preoccupation with the Indian Ocean and the immediate neighborhood, and partly because India had been continues to be a marginal player when it comes to economics. And rather unfortunately, India has kept away the regional dynamics, especially trade regional free trade agreements, RCEP. That would have been a golden opportunity. For whatever reasons, keeping out, actually further pushed India to the margins. And very quickly, I can go into the details if somebody wants about some of these aspects. Quadrilateral security dialogue, Quad, what it's called. Of course, we all know that the origin it traced to 2004 tsunami when Indian Navy was the first to send ships for rescue and to provide relief. And soon after, followed by major navies like Japanese and American navies. But they found there was something was missing in terms of communication and other aspects. That what is broadly called interoperability. So that provided created the setting for these countries. Already they were into close interaction and security issues in the region. So that led to especially Prime Minister Abe taking the initiative. Came out with this dialogue among countries that shared certain commonalities. That's what he said. It was called Arc of Democracies. So that led to the creation of the trilateral dialogue, and then later Australia joined. And we also know that India, Australia, and the US, along with Singapore, held one of the largest, probably the largest military exercises in September 2007 in the Bay of Bengal. So that was really the major kind of initiative that most people assume that this is going to be something like Asian NATO. And of course, NATO is entirely different. India is not a security not in security alliance with the US, for that matter, with anybody else. So Quad came to an abrupt end because Australia and the Labour Party, led by Kevin Rudd, said we are in 2008 February. He said we are withdrawing from the Quad. So that was the end of the Quad. But that was not the end of the trilateral, which is far more important. Which is the India, Japan, US trilateral that continued. I mean, dialogues continued and exercises continued, a whole lot of cooperation continued. India, started actually, increasingly started, importing arms from the USA. You can see that the dynamic never really, never really did not stop. So although Australia withdrew from that, so the trilaterals continued. They continued to play a very significant role. So as a result, New Delhi continued to focus on consolidated trilateral. Thanks also to the relentless efforts by Shinzo Abe, whose main objective was to find ways to counterbalance the Quad. Whatever one might say, it is basically kind of mechanism or a strategy to counterbalance China's rise. At the same time, one can see a perceptible shift in India's attitude ever since BJP came to power in 2014, which began to take more decisively, move closer to the US. So that one can very clearly see a shift in India's stance. And that one of the factors that contributed to China's assertive actions that led to whatever the hesitancy that India had vis-a-vis China. In September 2019, foreign ministers of these four countries met to launch the Quad as a formal mechanism. There's a fundamental difference between the Quad of Quad 1.0 and Quad that was launched in 2019. That was an informal mechanism, informal kind of dialogue. So all the officials met informally. Certainly, it was confined to the level of the officials. So now it's a different ball game altogether. This time it's a formal launch, and it was held at the very high level of foreign ministers. This is far more significant in that sense than the previous one. And New Delhi also agreed to participate in trilateral Australia, India, Japan trilateral dialogue at the foreign secretary level, again quite high level. There was also, in addition to that, another trilateral was launched, Australia, India, Indonesia in 2017. You can see a series of things happening along on these lines. An important facet to be noted that parallel to the progress on the Quad, bilateral military ties and security interactions have also started expanding rapidly among these. It's not just Quad. So you can see, the bilateral interactions, say between India and Japan, or India and Australia, India and the US, and Australia and Japan and Australia. So the bilateral, security cooperation and security dialogues also started expanding in a big way. And almost all these countries have one very high level mechanism called 2+2 mechanism, involving comprising the foreign and defense ministers. And so that is we can see that less than couple of years, September 2019 onwards, considerable progress has been has taken place. It's a formal mechanism, and discussions take place at a very, very high level. Quad is important because it offers a key role to India in shaping security order in the Indo-Pacific. And if you really look at Quad, most people tend to, which is not incorrect, but it is not just China. There is also, the larger question about regional security order. We've been talking about regional security post-Cold War. We're stuck with the post-Cold War paradigm. There's no movement towards creating a new security order. It's Cold War, post-Cold War. So this is Quad, in my opinion, is an attempt to look at creating a security order. So that's kind of using this mechanism for a viable security order. So the twin objectives were to counterbalance China certainly, and second is to create a stable regional balance of power. To that extent, if it succeeds, to what extent it will succeed, one has to wait and see. The Quad is very important for several reasons, not just the 4 countries. For instance, for many small and medium countries, especially in Southeast Asia, Quad provides considerable strategic latitude in dealing with China. So there is, that provides that latitude, that leg room for small and medium countries. And otherwise, they would have been forced to deal with China on China's terms. So this is, they have an alternative. That's one of the reasons why, ASEAN has come out with, the Indo-Pacific outlook, but certainly, they don't have, very, very critical kind of views about the Quad. A series of incidents along the border, between India and China, Doklam 2017, and last year Ladakh, and other. So one fact that has come out quite prominently is that say probably India is the only Asian country that can stand up to the Chinese pressures. In fact, in both during both this incident, Doklam and last year, it was China had to backtrack. So that message is getting across the Indo-Pacific. So certainly probably the only country in the region, I'm not talking about the USA, in the region that can really match militarily the Chinese might is India. But there is a major shortcoming as far as India is concerned. That is, it cannot match China's economic prowess. Okay, that will be a major handicap for India unless India really economically progresses rapidly and be able to provide the kind of leverage that China can do. There is going to be a serious limitation on India's part. So as a result, for Quad to really succeed as an effective platform mechanism to not only to counterbalance China, but create a regional stable security order, it has to create a robust economic agenda comparable to the BRI. So that is something which is missing. Only Japan, which is putting in money through various initiatives, especially the ODA, but otherwise, for most countries, for infrastructure development, connectivity, there's no option but to go for China's BRI. So it is absolutely essential that BRI, rather than confining solely to the security defense issues, need to expand the agenda to include the economic bring in economic aspects. And secondly, the Quad also has to get on board in some capacity countries such as Vietnam, Korea, Indonesia, and few other, especially the middle countries in the region. It really gives a lot of strategic heft to the Quad. There's some beginning has been made, but concerted efforts have to be made. Then only. Okay, I almost finished it. China factor, I don't want to go into the China factor. We all know that, it is essential that China is engaged one way or the other. Without China's, keeping China out is not going to really, help much. So engaging China is a critical aspect. China is not only revisionist, but also major disruptor. It is behaving like any other rising power historically, seeking to expand influence and and grab as much strategic space as possible. The clash of interests is inevitable. So getting Beijing on board the Indo-Pacific framework will immensely help in dealing with a number of issues and also ensure uninterrupted economic development. Horimoto-san, 1 minute conclusion. Okay, Indo-Pacific has generated a lot of buzz across the world. It's not just in this region, but Europe all over, and everyone is talking about Indo-Pacific. It is as much a geostrategic concept or idea as it is as much geoeconomic, and I think one should really keep that in mind. And geoeconomics continues to play a key role in shaping regional security order. We talked about in the morning about decoupling. I've been following this very, very closely. There have been any number of studies, and more recently I was reading a very detailed article in Bloomberg and a couple of weeks back in New York Times, detailing how the American companies refusing to leave China. So decoupling is not taking place. Companies or private sector will go where they can make money. So China is very, very attractive, both not only for manufacturing, but also as a massive market. Similarly, in Japan, Horimoto-san, you must be aware how many companies actually have quit China because Abe-san gave a call in. Very, very few. And those who have really quit China, shifted manufacturing base, they have done it purely for financial economic reasons, not because of geopolitical reasons. That's a reality I think one should really keep in mind. So geoeconomics, it's very, very important. It is India has not articulated its Indo-Pacific policy properly, except in the one speech and occasional speeches by foreign minister, this thing. But there's a lot of vagueness, lack of clarity on India's vision, strategy, whatever about the Indo-Pacific. So it is absolutely essential that India has to play a significant role in regional affairs. That really makes India a key player in not only in making itself relevant, but also playing a significant role in molding the regional security order. I'm sorry I've exceeded your time. Thank you so much for my presentation, for the time, and thanks for your patience. Horimoto-san, sorry, yes. I took a little longer.
Professor Naidu, thank you very much. Very interesting arguments. And then since I am a chair, I am not going to make any kind of counter argument to what you have said. But at least one thing is quite clear. You have presented sort of the importance of the Quad in terms of the regional order. That aspect is very interesting to know. Okay, thank you very much. Now there's two more speakers. The fourth speaker is Professor Sandeep Mishra. He talks on the Republic of Korea's Indo-Pacific approach, reluctance and prospect. Professor Mishra, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Could you hear me? Is it okay? Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. It's my delight to be part of this conference. Frankly speaking, in the last 3 days, I learned more than actually I would be able to contribute to discussion. But I have a limited mandate to talk about South Korea's Indo-Pacific approach. And I think how to explain South Korea's reluctance and what prospect we have for South Korea's participation in Indo-Pacific framework. The first thing I would like to say that as we know that Indo-Pacific idea is not very warmly welcomed in South Korea. South Korea had been quite reluctant. In 2017, after present president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, came to power, Trump had a meeting, he visited Korea, and in the meeting, he suddenly dropped this Indo-Pacific idea. free and open Indo-Pacific idea. And it was quite, say, surprising for South Korea. But soon South Korea gave a brief, you can say, introduction, brief, you can say, and they said that in free and open Indo-Pacific, this plan, there's nothing economic or strategic benefits which are meant for South Korea. So we are not still having any official formal position on Indo-Pacific strategy. That was beginning, and over the years, from 2017 till 2021 now, you can see that how South Korea had been trying to avoid talking more directly about Indo-Pacific strategy and basically trying to have some kind of, and one of the alternates which South Korea talks about is called New Southern Policy. I will talk about that. Having said that, South Korea has been reluctant about Indo-Pacific strategy. We also need to acknowledge that South Korea had been overall in agreement with the broader goal of Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific vision, or whatever you want to say. They do want free, they do want open, they do transparent, they do want inclusive Indo-Pacific region, because as you know, South Korea is a maritime trading nation, and that is very essential that a free and open maritime, and you can say this regional networks are maintained. So I'm saying that formally they are not very, you can say, eager to join Indo-Pacific strategy or vision, but at the same time they are in agreement with the broader contours of Indo-Pacific. Why Korea is so reluctant? And here I would mention about 2-3 important factors. One is basically, as all of us, we are aware about China. China is #1 trading partner of South Korea, and almost 1/4 of, you can say, external trade of South Korea is basically related somehow to China and China, Hong Kong, Taiwan area. So I think South Korea is quite aware that any problem, if it goes and it becomes very vocal in Indo-Pacific, will create huge problem for its economy and, you can say, its trade relations with China. So that is very important. And in a way, actually, in South Korea, there is some kind of, there is a, you can say, they talk about dual hierarchy. They talk about economic domain in which China is dominating the regional architecture. In security, they say that Americans are still very dominant. So they have a term called like Chung Kyung An Mi, means basically economy with Chinese and security with Americans. So that kind of division of labor they have created in their policy priorities in dealing with this regional politics. So China is essential for South Korea, because when they have to deal with North Korea, as all of us we know that maximum leverage on North Korea, if any country in the world they have, is China. So role of China will be very essential, very important in dealing with North Korea. So South Korea, because of primarily 2 reasons, trade and North Korea, they don't want to annoy China, and they know that whatever be the different manifestation and different statements, different, you can say, formal utterances of leaders about Indo-Pacific, China understands Indo-Pacific strategy and policy is probably targeted against them. And that means that if South Korea joins it, China will be slightly unhappy, and it may create problems for South Korea. The second reason for South Korea's reluctance is probably more relevant to this conference. It's about role of Japan. Actually, the chief economic advisor of Moon Jae-in in 2017, when they said that there's nothing economic and strategic benefit for South Korea, he mentioned that actually this is a Japanese initiative. And this Japanese initiative is to connect Japan with India, Australia, and it has nothing to do with a regional policy as such. So the fact of the matter is that given the South Korea-Japan relations and limitations in their relationship, we can talk about that in detail, but I think they feel that, look, we need to be very, very careful about Indo-Pacific strategy. They feel that whatever, like when we are describing, I think most of the speakers talked about how Indo-Pacific strategy or policy or vision evolved over the years, and role of Shinzo Abe, 2007 speech, then I think 2016 and 18, and so different points of time. So South Korea considers that Japan is basically the main mover of this concept, and that could be one of the reasons for reluctance. Here we also need to remember that from South Korean perspective, it's their perspective, we may agree or disagree, but the point of view in South Korea is debated that, look, we do have problem with rising assertive China, but it doesn't mean that we adopt a rising, or rather we try to counter it by rising assertive Japan, because it could be equally bad for us. So they have been reluctant because of these. And with the US alliance also, you know that in Trump administration period, South Korea and America had several problems related to, say, cost sharing of American troops on Korean Peninsula. Also, FTA, actually it was renegotiated. Then we also know that how defense equipments, actually South Koreans were forced to buy more defense equipment from Americans. So there are some, you can say, disagreements with the most important ally of South Korea, United States. So all in this context, probably we need to understand South Korean reluctance. Now, what they have been talking in alternate, they have been talking about New Southern Policy. And what is this New Southern Policy? This is primarily to connect people, peace and prosperity of this region. Actually, they have New Northern Policy in which Japan, Russia, China, Mongolia are actually involved. New Southern Policy is meant for ASEAN country plus India. So ultimately, if you combine their New Northern Policy and New Southern Policy, this is also another, you can say, version of their Indo-Pacific strategy. So they have been talking. Why they are talking about New Southern Policy? Actually, immediately after coming to power, Moon Jae-in emphasized this New Southern Policy. And within 2 years, he had been able to visit all the Southeast Asian country and India. It is quite, you can say, remarkable for a South Korean president, because generally they were quite involved in great power politics. In the sense, they were surrounded by big players, problem of Korea. So generally they don't have enough attention, enough space to talk about their Asia policy or say. So I'm saying that New Southern Policy, they said that, look, this is basically, we want to diversify our relationship. We don't want to just focus on four important, say, Japan, US, China, and Russia. We want to diversify our foreign policy, you can say, a focus. They also probably meant to articulate a new regional strategy, a new regional approach, how to deal with this region. So I think in last, I think 4 years actually, Moon Jae-in government has been very successfully, they have been trying to pursue this New Southern Policy. And whenever there had been actually US and South Korean exchanges, official exchanges, South Korea always comes out with this saying that, look, we are here to harmonize New Southern Policy with Indo-Pacific policy. And probably America, till now, it seems to be, they have been in agreement to provide that space to South Korea. Now, what is the, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy itself, you know, there have been several versions of Indo-Pacific strategy. In some versions, you call it vision. Some version, you call it strategic vision. In some, you can say notion, outlook, approach, strategy, policy. Actually, the main proponent of Indo-Pacific strategy, be it Japan, Australia, India, and US, they are not very clear about what does it mean actually in precise terms. Secondly, there have been shift in different countries' politics, as mentioned in our previous presentation, that look, Japan, they had so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, then they changed strategy to vision. So there had been some kind of backward-forward movements of different countries and their respective positions. So basically, similarly, you can see how suppose Quad country, they talk about Indo-Pacific strategy, and how non-Quad countries in the region they understand Quad. You can see how India, we have been talking, but we have been part of Quad, but at the same time, on various occasions, Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they have come out with saying that, look, we are going to approach or reach out Indo-Pacific primarily through our ACTIS policy. So India has ACTIS policy, South Korea has new Southern policy. ASEAN centrality, which we are talking actually last year, they came out with something called ASEAN Indo-Pacific Framework. So rather than saying strategy, policy or anything, saying framework. So lots of, you can say, churning happening in the regional politics, and main proponents of Indo-Pacific strategy, as well as the, you can say, bystanders also, they have been talking about, they have been contemplating what is basically this is all about. So South Korean point of view is that when there's a, you can say, the things are not very clear. It's not very wise decision. It would not be very prudent on part of South Korea to say that, look, we are part of Indo-Pacific strategy of it. Actually, we agree with the basic ideas, goals of Indo-Pacific, but at the same time, let's try to wait and watch and how things are evolved. Now, I will end by saying my last part of presentation that, look, you need to understand that, like suppose we say that South Korea, and sometimes in several Indian or say Japanese media, it has been reported that they have been critical about South Korean approach. But I would like to underline one important fact which we need to always keep in mind, and that is South Korea-US security alliance. You know, South Korea and US, they are having security alliance for a very long period, almost 7 decades they are having. Not only that, they have lots of defense and intelligence sharing agreements. Like we talk about India and US coming together, Quad and so many things, and we quote BECA, LEMOA, COMCOSA kind of agreement that now we can, actually all these arrangements are already there between US and South Korea. Similarly, suppose India and Australia last year, we signed something called MLCA, like share our bases. And South Korea already having similar, you can say, arrangement with India. So I'm saying that there are many things beyond the norm which have been happening, South Korea and Quad countries and beyond. So we need to be aware about that. The second important, we talk about joint military exercises. You know, US and South Korea, they are having joint military exercises for I don't know how many years. And 2018, they stopped because of dealing with North Korea. When Singapore summit, Trump decided, he said that we are going to stop it for some time. Now, joint exercises before 2018, generally US and South Korea, they used to have Ulchi, Freedom, Guardian, Key Resolve, and Follow, Eagle. So 3 important exercises. They used to, any year, any calendar year, they used to spread almost 3.5 months. So this much joint exercises they used to have. There's lots of synergy between US and South Korean defense establishment. So what I'm trying to say, that in case of South Korea not being very vocal, not being very, like, you can say, overt about Indo, we need to understand that they do have a very permanent kind of security alliance with US, and that's going to be very backbone of their strategic thinking in the region. Now, I would conclude by saying that, look, when we look at South Korean approach about how to deal with Indo-Pacific, it seems to me that they have their new Southern policy as the primary, you can say, mechanism through which they will try to reach out. Plus, they do have their alliance with United States and strategic partnership with several countries, including Australia, India, and Indonesia. So in this case, it seems to me that they agree with foreign, free and open Indo-Pacific, free, open, inclusive and transparent. And so they are having agreement with that, but they just want to keep it on a wait and watch list, rather than being against this idea of, they are not against, they are not having any big problem, just they are keeping themselves, I think, slightly distant from this idea. I will end by saying my last point, that look, when we talk about Indo-Pacific vision, and we consider that this Indo-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific vision, which Americans or Japanese, Australians, or say even now Indian, we have been talking about, we also need to keep in mind there could be several Indo-Pacific visions. One vision could be coming from big countries, and they are talking about Asian centrality. But there could be another vision coming from bottoms up, like the way, like we have been talking for decades, ASEAN way. So why can't those countries could have also prospect to articulate this ASEAN way through ASEAN, through East Asia Summit, through different mechanisms, through their bilateral cooperation. So we need basically less adamant about having one Indo-Pacific strategy or policy, and which should be adhered by all. And rather, give this space that country, they could have their Indo-Pacific strategy, and let's have a, you can say, both way movement, top to bottom also, and bottom to top also. From middle power countries and from great powers, they can come together and they can have a better future for the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mishra. I'm sure that you have presented nicely the aspect of the Korea's stance toward the FOIP and Quad, and in terms of the close relations with China. And moreover, you have pointed out clearly about the New Southern policy. That is another remarkable aspect of Korea's new foreign policy now. And in that sense, I would like to say that you have just achieved all what Professor Sravani has put you in this session. Thank you very much. Now, the fifth and last speaker is Ambassador Gautam Bambawale. He is talking on an Indian perspective of China's activity in the Indian Pacific. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to also thank Professor Srabani Roy Chowdhury for inviting me to participate in this session. The good news is that I will be brief. I'll take less than 15 minutes, which you have allotted to me very kindly. I think I should be done in about 12 minutes or so. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, that my paper is called or is titled An Indian Perspective of China's Activities in the Indo-Pacific. So I'll just try to summarize some of the main points which I have made in my paper and which I have contributed at this conference. Basically, the paper is divided into 4 parts. The first is a backgrounder. And in the backgrounder, of course, we remember very, very fondly the major speech made by the then Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Abe, in India's parliament, which was titled The Confluence of the Two Seas. The second part of my paper would be about India's approach to the Indo-Pacific. The third part, of course, is what are China's actions, activities in the Indo-Pacific. And the last part is, of course, how India reacts to these activities and these actions. So let me try to just summarize the main points that I have made in my paper. So as many of the other speakers have already said, that if you want to look at what is India's approach to the Indo-Pacific, you must go to the speech made by Prime Minister Modi on the 1st of June 2018 at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And that is, of course, where it has been spelled out in great detail, but it has been elaborated after that also. The main points of India's approach is, of course, first of all, inclusion or inclusiveness, which a lot of the speakers have already highlighted. The second point of our Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific approach is openness and transparency. The third is a common rules-based order for the region, which itself should be evolved through discussion and dialogue. The fourth is peace. Fifth is prosperity. Sixth is ASEAN centrality. Seventh is freedom of navigation and unimpeded commerce. Eighth is the peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law. Once again, focus on a rules-based order. And the last point of India's approach to the Indo-Pacific is respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. Now, starting from here, of course, that, we have the approach that all countries in the region, whether they are big or small, have an equal stake in it, and that there is no place in the region and in our approach to the Indo-Pacific for the traditional balance of power politics or a sequential approach to growth where one country grows first, the second grows next, and the third grows third, and so on down the line. And of course, we do not believe in a more powerful country trying to make its own presence felt over smaller or less powerful countries. So one of the important points in the conclusion that I have drawn is that India has, to a certain extent, of course, India will promote and protect its national interests. There's no doubt about that. But India also has a normative approach, to the Indo-Pacific, to foreign policy in general, and that stems from certain philosophical guidelines, certain philosophical basis that Indian culture, that Indian philosophy, that Indian civilization gives us. And these are, that we distinguish between good and bad, between good and evil, between right and wrong, between what we call dharma and adharma. And our foreign minister, Mr. Dr. S. Jaishankar, has written about this very well in his last book called The India Way. So there is a little bit about this normative aspects which creep into India's foreign policy, into India's Indo-Pacific policy. And this is very much part of the India Way. One of the basic tenets of our Indo-Pacific policy, one of the basic underlying factors of the Indo-Pacific policy is that all countries must have a similar approach. We call it Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. And this is part of India's normative approach to the Indo-Pacific. And it is also one of the, weaknesses of India's approach, that it believes that all the other countries will behave in this manner and will not follow the traditional balance of power politics or big fish eating small fish kind of approach. Instead, we have the approach that a rising tide must lift all boats. And therefore, we look at China's activities in the Indo-Pacific from this perspective. There is also a more recently proposed Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which Professor Naidu mentioned. And, we have been very happy that Japan has taken the lead on the connectivity issue, that Australia has taken the lead on maritime ecology, and India herself has taken the lead on maritime security and disaster risk reduction, all of which are part of the 7 pillars of our Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. But let me move quickly to what are China's activities in the Indo-Pacific. And these can be divided into 2 parts. One is what is China doing in the South China Sea? And the second is what is China doing in the Western Indian Ocean, which is very important for us in the Gulf of Aden and off the Horn of Africa. So in the South China Sea, of course, we know that China has built several artificial islands and has constructed these into bases. Secondly, they have militarized these islands, or they have militarized these features in the South China Sea, despite having made promises that they will not do so. Now, this may be looked upon as diplomacy by some people, but for us, and I'll be very undiplomatic here, it's plain, simple lying. Lies have been told in order to lull people into some kind of, to lull them into believing that what is being said will be carried out. Lastly, the Chinese have been claiming that the South China Sea is all part of China's historical claims based on what is its 9-dashed line. But we know, all of us know, that in 2016, the tribunal under UNCLOS, under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, has ruled against China's historical claims, which it of course does not accept. It says it does not accept the ruling of the tribunal. So you can see very clearly that China has opposed a rules-based order in the South China Sea, and India's reaction to it is very, very clear, very strong, that this is just not acceptable. China has also been opposing the freedom of navigation operations that are being carried out by many countries, including, of course, Japan, the United States, Australia, now even France, and perhaps the UK in the South China Sea. And basically what China has been doing is slowly and steadily strengthening its maritime claims in the South China Sea, as well as its control around the various features in the South China Sea. And it's very clear that from the position that India takes towards the Indo-Pacific, including the South China Sea, that we are totally opposed to the Chinese activities as well as to China's approach in this region. Let me quickly move to what's happening in the Western Indian Ocean, which is in the Gulf of Aden and off the Horn of Africa. There, of course, we know that China has since 2000 and odd participated in the anti-piracy operations there. It gave them a very good reason to be present in that part of in that geography. It has now got a naval base in Djibouti, and it is also building bases in Hambantota in Sri Lanka and Gwadar in Pakistan. More recently, it has been deploying submarines in the Indian Ocean, all of which is okay with us as long as as long as there are no incidents at sea or there are no obvious big power politics or big power plays in the Western Indian Ocean and in this part of the world. So which brings me to my last part, which is that how does India view China's activities in the Indo-Pacific? I have already said, and I'll repeat it, that we view their activities very dimly. We do not accept their activities, and therefore India is going to be a very, very strong proponent of not just the Indo-Pacific, but also the Quad. You can see that this is happening. I'll just end by making one final last point. Many Indian observers, and this is part of my paper, have called Chinese activities in the South China Sea as they've called it salami slicing. And salami slicing means that you take small actions every time which do not alarm by themselves. But then over a period of time, when you put together all these little actions, you see that it's quite a big action and even has strategic implications. Now, India herself has experienced these salami slicing tactics of China, most recently over the last 9 or 10 months in the Ladakh region of the India-China frontier. India opposes these actions by China, not only on our own frontiers, but also in the South China Sea. So I think India is going to be a very strong partner of the United States, Japan, and Australia in the Quad. India is, of course, believes in ASEAN centrality and will be a strong partner for ASEAN and other countries in the region. And I think the good news for Japan, because we're looking at Japan's strategic perspective of the Indo-Pacific, is very broadly India and Japan's perspective on the Indo-Pacific, and especially China's activities there, are broadly overlapping, and therefore we have a strong basis for a partnership on this front. So I'm going to stop there, Mr. Chairman, and hand the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bombawale. And you have clearly mentioned and clearly make it spotlight on the normative foreign policy of India and also China's recent activities, what is their new countries, and so on. You have made a very clear cut presentation about your idea. Now, the five persons have presented the argument. Now the turn to the to comment on all these 5 papers.
Horimoto Sensei, just come closer to your mic.
Okay, just a moment. Yes. Now the 5 presenters have completed their presentations. Now the turns to the Professor Jabin Yakov. Due to all the presenters are very punctual in the timing of their presentation, we have enough time, so you need not to worry about your time in making your comment. And I expect you make a very critical opinions, all 5 papers. Now, Professor Jabin Yakov, please.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Horimoto, and thank you to JNU for inviting me. What I'm going to do is not look at each of the presentations, but I'll try and make some broad points about some of the threads that run through the presentations, and perhaps pose some questions that to both the panelists as well as the audience attending this event. So first and foremost, let me just say that I enjoyed all the presentations. There was much food for thought, and the kind of questions that I raise perhaps might be for one or two of you, or for all of you. Now, first point I think is it would seem that the presentation is clear that there is a lack of clarity, coherence about what interests drive different countries to taking on or not taking on the Quad or the Indo-Pacific idea, right? So because there's a lack of clarity about interests, perhaps each country is clear about its interests, but they're not clear about the interests of other countries. And therefore, as long as that lack of clarity exists, there's also a lack of clarity or a lack of ability to formulate clear objectives in the Indo-Pacific. So that's the first point. The second is, which is sort of left unstated, is that, what does each country understand China's approach or interest to be, right? If the Chinese do not see India's approach or any other country's approach towards Indo-Pacific as inclusive, as a call for, and I'm quoting somebody here, a call for an Asia of cooperation rather than of rivalry. If the Chinese don't believe this or do not think these claims are sincere, then what is to be gained by de-emphasizing, as Dr. Tamari pointed out, the Japanese approach was de-emphasizing strategy and switching from strategy to vision, right? He even says that the foreign strategies of India and Japan have never been closer. But to what end is this closeness if you still cannot formulate a clear objective to get China to behave, right? Or then the question for academics at least is, and there is a diplomat in the panel as well, is whether this is just semantics, that you say something because that is the purpose of foreign policy or diplomacy, and do something else, right? Which essentially is exactly what the Chinese think is happening. And therefore, the question for academics at least is to ask, why then this sort of dichotomy between, what is the rhetoric and what is the action? And, the question really to Dr. Tamari is that, even if one were to talk about chronology, and that the change happened, I think he does an excellent job of showcasing how Japan's policies changed, or Japan's idea of what Indo-Pacific should be changed, is that, and curiously also this applies to the Indian case, where Prime Minister Modi at the Shangri-La dialogue puts forward this new idea of Indo-Pacific, is that this happens exactly at the time that it's clear to everybody that the Chinese have broken their promises on the South China Sea, that the Chinese are militarizing the South China Sea. So it's, for countries like South Korea, I can well imagine that there is, or any other country that is watching from the outside, I can well imagine that there is a confusion, as in, on the one hand, these are the countries that are expected to counter China's rise or China's assertiveness or aggressiveness. But on the other hand, they are, making milk and honey statements about inclusiveness and keeping Asia open for cooperation. Now, Ambassador Bambawale did mention a normative element, but I'll come to this normative element. That normative element is also not consistent, both internally within countries as well as externally in terms of their foreign policies. So, and I think Dr. Sandeep Mishra captures this best when he says that there are oscillating intents as well as actions of the four major participants, which is here the Quad. So primarily, it seems that all countries in the region have a problem, which is of avoidance of dealing with the principal threat. It is as if the democracies have taken on themselves, India, Japan, Australia, they have taken on themselves the task of both acting and appearing responsible vis-a-vis China. So, Professor Naidu talks about the key to engaging China is a kind of carrot and stick policy. Now, the sticks are evident, but what are the carrots that we have? If the carrots that we have are about, trying to change the rhetoric and trying to get China to believe that everybody is, trying to be inclusive, then those don't seem to be working. I mean, China is no rabbit. It simply doesn't seem to be eating any carrots. And clearly, as again Sandeep points out, South Korea's reluctance, despite everybody trying to accommodate China, is also clear. I mean, in the sense that South Korea has its own sets of interests that are at play here. So essentially, there is an unwillingness to confront the evidence before your eyes, right? Dr. Wilkins pointed out that neither Japan nor Australia seem to think China was a military threat. I mean, this is frankly an astonishing sort of an position for countries to take, given the evidence of what China has been doing, both in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, and now also on the border with India, right? So this gap in comprehension, this gap needs to be explained. This is what scholars, I think, need to do a better job of explaining. Three, the question of self-interest. Is again not something explicitly mentioned in any of the presentations, bar Dr. Mishra's excellent presentation about why South Koreans have the sort of interest and how clearly the South Koreans have a problem first and foremost, basically with Japan rather than with China, right? So this hot and cold approach on the Quad by the Quad members themselves. It shows that there is an articulation of self-interest which is not quite clear. I mean, Ambassador Bambawale makes a good his paper, I recommend everyone read this, puts this across very, very well. Again, the question that I asked before sort of stand out. Fourth, definitely institutional processes and links are underway between the members of the Quad. And certainly this has been encouraged or pushed forward because of China's actions. I mean, China is the principal driver of many of these actions, and perhaps without China, there would not have been this impetus. But, and we could say that, trust and reliability, interoperability, these are all positive outcomes. But it's hardly the case that shared values are a major driver for the relationships. As Dr. Tamari shows, Japan's primary goal in switching from strategy to vision was not because it saw alignment with India, but because it saw that it needed to put its relationship with China back on track, right? Ambassador, and this is the point I made before, that on the values question, Ambassador Bambawale makes a point about Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam and India's views on this. But internally also, there needs to be the same adherence to questions of dharma and adharma. And in India right now, frankly, definitions of these terms are open to question. So that I think is a central consideration. On shared interests, again, India, Japan, there's a problem. India is very clearly against the BRI, but Japan is a supporter of the BRI. And even as India and Japan are cooperating on the AAGC, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, I didn't see this mentioned at all. The question is, what is the progress on this? So in terms of, finally, in terms of questions for the future, now, unlike Professor Naidu, I'm not sure that the Quad needs to focus on anything but China. And I'm not very clear where the legroom is. If the Quad is a room for smaller countries to sort of work with the Quad exists, if the Quad is not explicit in terms of its aims. The Quad, to my mind, has to be sort of clearly a security and military-driven operation, because otherwise there is no confidence that any other country has in terms of what the Quad can achieve vis-a-vis China, right? But instead, what we see is China still manages to browbeat the smaller nations, even the big nations like Japan, into changing its policies, from strategy to vision, for example. Everybody's already on board the BRI, remember. And if caution is still going to be the case for all countries involved, South Korea being a prime example, why is it useful for the Quad members to continue to hedge, to continue to pull their punches? What exactly, for example, did India gain, from, taking its foot off the gas pedal post-Doklam, engaging in the informal summits? What exactly has India gained, by being very careful, by talking about inclusiveness in the Indo-Pacific? I mean, what we got is Galvan, essentially, right? So the argument here is, why is it there is a hesitancy or there's a problem in matching the rhetoric with actions, or actions with the rhetoric? I mean, despite this inclusive talk, actions are something else as far as both as well as China is concerned. I mean, Ambassador Bambawala himself mentioned that the India-US relationship has become all the more closer post the arrival of the Modi government, right? And this is not something that the Chinese are likely to look at it anyway, except that if you're with the US, then basically you're against us. So some big questions is, questions are, the ignored party, Trump, essentially. Did Trump, we talk about China all the time, but how did Trump change interest calculations of the countries in the Indo-Pacific? Does China's aggression against India in the latest instance in Ladakh change calculations for other members of the Quad for the wider Indo-Pacific? Does China's economic coercion against Australia really change the calculations for the other members of the Quad? I mean, besides, other than the United States, neither India nor Japan have actually commented much on this officially. I heard this expression that China has backtracked somehow from Ladakh or even earlier from Doklam. But is that really the case? Is this really the lesson that India's neighborhood is taking away from Ladakh? Finally, the elephant in the room essentially is of ASEAN centrality. Is this really necessary? Is this really useful? How much are you willing, each country willing to sacrifice efficiency or results for the sake of political expediency? Perhaps telling ASEAN bluntly to shape up or ship out might work. So I've always been a little worried about this ASEAN centrality argument, because it seems to be an excuse to do nothing or to do the minimum required. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jacob. And Professor Surabhani-san, we are going to have another 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
Yeah, you can take another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that case, Javed has made he is an excellent commentator, and he mentioned all 5 presenters' name in his comments. So from now on, I'll ask or request all the 5 presenters to respond to what Javin said to all about your presentation. And then floor is open to all. Okay. So firstly, I'd like to request Professor Wilkinson to respond to the Javin's comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, Javin, I think you really nailed a lot of the key issues there, really summed it up well. Just to respond, with time being limited, there's a lot I could say. I suppose maybe I should just clarify that Australia and Japan don't view China as a direct military threat to their territory, with the possible exception of the East China Sea, the Senkaku Islands for Japan. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're in this sort of blurry boundary between, well, will risk become threat? But they certainly see China as, even if they don't use the emotive language of threat, to the rules-based international order and regional stability. I mean, that's for sure, for all the reasons that have been mentioned by the last few speakers. Couple of just little things that I wanted to add. When we're talking about this sort of the blurry boundaries or multiple versions and misconceptions about the Indo-Pacific concept, I mean, of course, you're right. Every country has its own version of the Indo-Pacific and what they want to get out of it. But I think some countries have crystallized more what they, and stated in their sort of foreign policy or security documents what they identify as the Indo-Pacific as a kind of a stage for policy. And then I think some pretty concrete policies, what we might perhaps call Indo-Pacific strategies, have followed by that. And I think there may be a sort of a sliding spectrum on among the various Quad countries as to like how sort of robust those strategies are. I mean, for example, if you look at the United States, I mean, we're not talking about the United States here, but I think it's important to note they made very, very clear what their Indo-Pacific strategy is and what they're going to do about China in the recent declassified document from I think it was Department of Defense or the White House anyway. And I think Australia and Japan are becoming more clear about it. I think and India is perhaps still ruminating a little bit more on exactly how they want to operationalize their idea of the Indo-Pacific. Of course, it's highly attractive to India because it puts India front and center in the region as well. So I mean, there's strong incentives to that. And then just the very last point I wanted to pick up, which came up a little bit earlier, is this whole idea. A couple of the presenters stressed the inclusivity of the Indo-Pacific concept. That is and isn't reflected in some of the Indo-Pacific strategies and some of the sort of strategies, visions like the FOIP. So, for example, it's difficult for, I mean, and again, I think there's a spectrum here. So India is the most inclusive. Then I think Japan says it's inclusive, but knows it's not really going to happen. Then Australia maybe. And then the United States doesn't really make any bones about it not being inclusive. Its Indo-Pacific strategy is about a response to China. So there's sort of a sliding scale there about how much people countries are genuinely believe in inclusivity. I mean, it's very, very difficult to see how when China has its own alternative vision for the region that centers around the BRI and so forth, that a lot of the things are the principles and a lot of the policies that extend from the FOIP are completely antithetical to that. So, I mean, there's no way China is going to get on board with a lot of those things. I think we just need to sort of bear that in mind when we talk about inclusivity rhetorically, but then actually the policies are entirely incompatible with what China would accept with its own national interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And Javin, Professor Yakov, you made a quick response after finishing 5 persons, okay, if you want. And then secondly, Professor Tamari, please make your comment.
Okay.
Response to this.
Yes. Dr. Jacob, thank you very much for your comment. To the comment, to the point comment. And actually, answering those questions is beyond my capability, but I'd like to say something. And mainly, I'm working on rhetorics and policies, so I'm not good at ground reality, especially military affairs. Some other scholars like Nagao-san are working on that aspect. There is division of labor. I'm working on policy side. But I want to say something about the purposes and object of policies. In my paper, I argue that Japan and India came across so much in recent years. And in that, I mean, we share the basic threat perception and purpose. Now, China is eminent threat for us, both Japan and India, and we have to manage. We cannot win militarily against China, so we have to manage China. And how to manage China? Then in Japan, chose to engage China. So I think we are not all, complete India now, not all the same, but we Japan changed its mind from countering China to engage China, and so more inclusive came inclusive. Japan came inclusive in recent years. So I mean, I argue that Japan, India came across in the perspective of Indo-Pacific. Actually, I'd like to hear views on this aspect from Ambassador Bambare on this India-Japan relations. I really want to know his views. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Professor Naidu. Professor Naidu, are you listening? Your turn.
Unmute yourself. Professor Naidu, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute him. Thanks, Jacob, for the comments, and I noted down several points. I don't think make comments on all the comments you made. Firstly, I would like to make it clear, at least from my perspective, I know that there's a fundamental difference between Indo-Pacific and Quad. Indo-Pacific is not an exclusive club. Quad, it is Indo-Pacific is a geographical kind of regional framework, so that all those countries which are part of the geography are part of that. It's not for India, Japan to include a country or exclude a country. So that is one, and secondly, Quad is an exclusive. This is the 4 countries that have come together, and they have yet to, it is being we started only in 2019 in more seriously. It will take for it to evolve. And one of the certainly the 2 objectives I mentioned were to counterbalance China. There's no question about that. And secondly, try and attempt to create a rules-based order, whatever new security order. No, these are the twin objectives, and maybe as it takes shape and evolves, it might include many other aspects. So my point is that China, which if you really look at Jacob, you've been following China for a long time than probably any one of us, and China pretty well. But if you really look at China, has been every time it comes out with very critical statement about anything, starting from ASEAN formation, okay, every time it has come around endorsing that idea. So you have seen Chinese whatever they might say on the face of it, but slowly they come around. My suspicion is that China might embrace Indo-Pacific. They have nothing to lose by embracing that. Okay, Quad is a different ball game altogether. And second is about China backtracking. And both during the Doklam and more recently in Ladakh, Galwan region. I don't know. I go by what our senior military officers issue statements and what appears in newspapers. I'm not privy to what exactly happened and what's happening. China has withdrawn, and Indian government officially, including the chief of army, has stated that they seem to be happy that China has been pushed back. That is, China has backtracked. Both Doklam, we know, pretty well of Doklam. So that is certainly it will reverberate in the rest of the Indo-Pacific. That probably India is the only country that can stand up to China militarily, and then force China to which China has never done. And if you really look at historically, either on the border with the Soviet Union, they fought and they're willing to get nuclear bombed, but they stood their ground. Or with vis-a-vis Vietnam, or now in South China Sea, probably the only place where they had to go back was has been along the India border. Okay, I don't know, like, I go by what appears in the press. So to that extent, like, the way China looks at India, they may have 100 reasons, but it is quite different from the way they look at, either Australia or ASEAN or any other country, or even for that matter, even Japan. On ASEAN centrality, I have serious reservations about ASEAN. It has got serious limitations. We have seen it, 1997, 98. When the financial crisis hit, it went for a toss, and even Go Chok Tong went to the extent of let's close down ASEAN. That's what he even openly said that. But if you really look at objectively, which are the countries which can productively and meaningfully engage China, excepting ASEAN? That is ASEAN's strength. The largest trading partner for China today is ASEAN. Okay, and its strategic, geostrategic interests are deeply entwined with the region historically. So they cannot ignore ASEAN. They cannot ignore Southeast Asia. That is their soft underbelly. Okay, so that's where ASEAN figures very, very prominently. Whatever one might have reservations about regional multilateralism, there's no question that regional multilateralism, ASEAN-led multilateral organizations are playing a role. Okay, in both geoeconomics and geopolitics of the East Asian region. So to that extent, ASEAN serves a very, very important purpose. And finally, on Quad, Quad, as long as it's quite natural that individual interests dominate. Certainly, it's not possible at this stage, when it is in the formative stage, to have complete agreement and range of issues. Individual countries their interests and look at to what extent it is congruent with my interests. And over the years, and it will take maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, their interests might converge, and they might come up with new agendas and new initiatives, new steps, and depending upon a whole lot of other developments. But there is a broad understanding, no question about that. The fact that these countries, especially the three, US, Japan, and India, have been holding these exercises. And the exercises is no more one of those passive exercises, as you know. They're militarily consequential, militarily significant exercises. Imagine involving nuclear submarines to aircraft carriers to whatnot. This is is not one of those number of exercises many countries do. They do send a message across. And I think that to that extent, Quad serves a very, very important person, sending a political signal to China. Hey, mind your limits. If you cross the red lines, consequences will be serious. This is a political message, that that goes to China. So that's the whole purpose of creating a Quad. To that extent, I think it is serving an important function. I think I'll end here. Thank
To
you so
that
much.
extent, you look like a military commander. Okay, Professor Mishra.
I think once I met a South Korean scholar, and I told that South Korea has been reluctant to Indo-Pacific, this idea. And his answer was very interesting. He said that, look, even if Quad countries, suppose they are the most important proponents, and if you look at their behavior, Quad country, you will realize that none of them, they want to be at the front line. Actually, part of Quad in dealing with China, but at the same time, they want to be that others should be leading it rather than, and that's why you can see that at one point of time when Japan was, Australia was actually very, you can say, eager to make it happen. At that point of US and India, they were actually considered to be reluctant partners. US, they did have some, you can say, other, you can say, like pivot to Asia and some other, you can say, mechanisms. But Indo-Pacific strategy, this free and open Indo-Pacific, it came in 2016 in US, you can say, official document. So now when India post Galwan Valley, when we are becoming, you can say, eager, you can see that 2018, Japan is moving from strategy to vision. So actually his point, and I think I agree with that what happened that rather than actually, you can say blaming one another, is also, you can say, issue to introspect and realize that different countries, as per their national interests, they are going to have their own positions. And from China's perspective, it seems to me that they are quite, you can say, successful till now, that even Quad, never all the 4 countries have been similarly serious about Quad, and it's with China. One or other country, they are going to be lukewarm, and ultimately China will become. So that's my, you can say, additional submission to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, finally, Ambassador Bambawale, and with some several additional questions from the presenters.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Professor Jacob, for your comments. Paid very close attention to them. My personal view is that, you know, in the Indo-Pacific, there is a coming disagreement on whether it will be a democratic vision for the Indo-Pacific or an authoritarian vision for the Indo-Pacific. And I think where this question is concerned, it is very clear that the Quad countries, and here I'm using, I agree with Professor Naidu that Quad and Indo-Pacific is different, but the Quad countries, which is Australia, Japan, India, the United States, of course, are very clear that they want to see a democratic vision of the Indo-Pacific prevailing. And therefore, I would say that, you know, you can say that, you know, some of them agree with BRI, others don't disagree with, they don't agree with BRI. I don't believe that is important. Obviously, Japan and India, or Japan and Australia, or India and Japan, India and Australia will not agree on each and everything under the sun. But where it is a question of an authoritarian Indo-Pacific vis-a-vis a democratic vision of the Indo-Pacific, we are in complete agreement. And I agree entirely that the Quad is becoming increasingly functional. It is becoming increasingly, you know, one. And if called upon, it can provide an answer to this question of an authoritarian vis-a-vis a democratic vision for the Indo-Pacific. I'll stop there. I don't want to talk about the dharma and questions about India, because, you know, because that is, yes, that is part of democracy. You can disagree about that, you can agree about that, you can argue about that. I have no problems with that, because India is a democracy and you can have different visions and you can have different opinions on it. But let me stop there, Chair, and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to also make a question to you again, but stop it. And then, Professor Javi, do you have any short comments?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll just very quickly respond to each. I think Dr. Wilkins-Thomas's idea of a sliding scale of positions and commitments on the Indo-Pacific, I think that's a very useful analytical tool, and perhaps we need to look a bit more into that. I think Dr. Tamari also makes, I hope Dr. Tamari got some bit of his answers from Ambassador Bambawale's intervention just now. But I'm also I also want to sort of second something of what he says, that I'm glad to see that the Indo-Japan relationship is not based entirely on individuals. I mean, I think over time what we've seen, and this was a fear, that it will only be something between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe, but there is increasing institutional depth. And to that extent, I agree, of course, with Professor Naidu and Ambassador Bambawale when they say that there is a fundamental difference between the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. I'm glad to see this articulated clearly. But my only point was that as far as the Chinese are concerned, they don't see this difference. And because of this, many countries sitting on the sidelines also don't see this difference, or are unwilling to see this difference for fear of, angering China. And therefore, the Quad will have to reach a decision at some point. Where is the thrust of their effort going to be? Because if, for example, Quad plus one is an idea, I'd imagine South Korea is an excellent candidate. But as Sandeep just pointed out, the South Koreans are too savvy in order to actually involve themselves in something like this without each of the Quad members showing equal commitment. And that, I think, is a very, very important point as well. If, as Ambassador Bambawale says, that the democratic vision is clear and that this is a clear and present objective for the Quad members, I mean, it's excellent news. It's great to hear that. But I think he'll also agree that there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of proving this commitment to a wider audience, and that each of China's actions, when they are met with less than complete clarity by members of the Quad, the US has renewed phone-off operations, or sort of is continuing phone-off operations. The Biden administration has not completely junked Trump's China policy. But the US is very clear. I think that has been mentioned, but that's not the case with other countries, other members of the Quad yet. And I think that really is a fundamental weakness. And I'll stop it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is open to all participants. So any question, please show by the sign. Is there anyone?
That I'm seeing anyone right now, but I'm hoping that somebody point.
Perhaps all the audiences are overpowered by the previous discussions. Meeting presenters and sponsors.
I think, Sensei, you can therefore close the
Okay.
session. Yeah.
Yes, and then time is now almost lunch hour in Indian Standard Time. Here it is only at the moment it is 5 p.m. So, but in India it's lunch time now. So I move my chair to the Professor. You please conclude your session.
I have my students first giving the vote of thanks. Aishwarya, may you come in to give the vote of thanks to the panel?
Good afternoon, everyone. And it is indeed an honor for me to express my vote of thanks to this wonderfully diverse and intellectually enlightening session. I express my heartfelt gratitude to the chair for conducting this session so effectively and smoothly. My heartfelt thanks also goes out to all the panelists for the informative thoughts from which I believe we all took something back today. Lastly, but definitely not the least, I would like to thank the audience for attending the session so patiently. It was indeed an honor for us to host all of you today. Thank you all and have a good day ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aishwarya. And may I remind the audience that we are coming back tomorrow with the young scholar teams who would be presenting their work. I would request as many of you to join and encourage these young scholars who are trying to make a life out of this Japan studies as their career option. So please do join us. And thank you, the panel and the chair, for having been so communicative and effective during your discussion. I think we took a lot back from the session. Thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, professors.
Thank you. Thank you, Sravani-san. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sravani. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wickens. Thank you, Naidu. After a long time, we caught up on this. Thank you.
Harimota-san.
Bye-bye.